Hey guys, tonight we begin a journey into one of the most beautiful and most misunderstood Christmas traditions you've ever known. For over 2 centuries, a simple song has been hiding something. Or has it? What if I told you that millions of people believe the 12 days of Christmas is actually a secret code, written by Catholics in fear for their lives, designed to teach forbidden beliefs to their children under the noses of persecutors? And what if I told you that this beautiful story might be completely wrong? Tonight, we're peeling back the layers of history's most romantic Christmas conspiracy. Before we step into this story together, I want to ask you something. If what I share tonight surprises you, moves you, or makes you see Christmas differently, would you take just a second to hit that subscribe button and maybe, just maybe, tap that like button too? Not because I'm asking, but because you genuinely feel it's worth sharing. And hey, I'm curious, where are you right now? Tucked in bed in New York, curled up on a couch in California? Drop a comment and let me know what time it is where you are. I love knowing we're all connected through these stories, no matter where we are in the world. Now, dim those lights, get comfortable, maybe let a soft fan hum in the background, and let's unravel this mystery together. So picture this. It's December, maybe 1995, maybe 1997. You're sitting at your computer, one of those chunky beige monitors, and you receive an email. It's been forwarded and forwarded again, and probably forwarded about 17 more times before it reached you. The subject line reads, "The true meaning of the 12 days of Christmas. Must read." You open it, and what you read, it gives you chills. The email tells you a story about England between 1558 and 1829, when Catholics were hunted, when practicing their faith openly could mean imprisonment or worse, when teaching children about their religion could get a family destroyed. And so, the email says, clever Catholic priest created a secret code. They wrote a song, a seemingly innocent Christmas carol, that on the surface was just about bizarre gifts from a true love. But hidden within each verse, the entire Catholic catechism, the partridge in a pear tree, that's Jesus Christ, the 2 turtle doves, the Old and New Testaments, 3 French hens, faith, hope, and charity, and on, all the way to 12 drummers drumming representing the 12 points of the Apostles' Creed. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, truly. The idea that people loved their faith so much that they encoded it into a song, that children sang these secrets in plain sight, right under the noses of those who wanted to silence them. It's the stuff of movies, it's resistance, it's hope, it's actually probably not true. I know, I'm sorry. Trust me, I wanted it to be true too. But here's where our story really begins. Because the truth is somehow even more fascinating than the legend. Let's start with the facts. The first known printed version of the 12 Days of Christmas appeared in 1780 in a book published in England. Not as a song, but as a chant, a memory game, the kind of thing people recited at parties. Before that, we're not entirely sure. Some scholars think it might have French origins, but that's still debated. What we do know is that the melody we recognize today, the one you're probably humming in your head right now, wasn't added until 1909 by a British composer named Frederick Austin. Now, here's the thing. That email you received in 1995, that beautiful story about the secret code, it appears to have been written by a Canadian named Hugh McKellar in 1979. He published it in a hymn journal, essentially as a creative theory. An interesting idea. Not as historical fact, but as a wouldn't it be neat if kind of thought. 3 years later, in 1982, a Catholic priest named Father Hal Stockert picked up this idea and expanded it. He posted it online in 1995, right when the internet was young and wild and fact-checking was, let's just say, optional. And then it exploded. Suddenly, church bulletins were printing it as fact. Christian websites shared it as the true history. People forwarded that email to everyone they knew. And a beautiful piece of creative speculation became accepted as gospel truth. Pun absolutely intended. But wait, let's pause here. Because before we dismiss this story entirely, we need to understand something crucial. The Catholic persecution in England was very, very real. This isn't folklore. This is documented history. From 1558, when Elizabeth thus took the throne, until 1829, when Parliament finally passed the Catholic Emancipation Act, Catholics in England lived under what's called the penal laws. These weren't just inconvenient restrictions. We're talking about laws that made it illegal to hear Mass, illegal to educate your children in the Catholic faith, illegal to hold public office, illegal to own land beyond a certain amount. Catholic priests could be executed, and many were. Between 1535 and 1681, over 300 Catholics were martyred in England, including 189 priests. So the backdrop of the theory? That part is absolutely historically accurate. Catholics did have to practice their faith in secret. They did create hiding places in their homes, priest holes, where clergy could hide from persecutors. Families did gather in the dead of night to hear Mass in secret. This fear was real. But here's where the secret code theory falls apart. First problem, timing. If the song was written during the persecution period as a teaching tool, why don't we have any copies of it from that time? The earliest version we have is from 1780, and by then, the worst of the persecution had eased considerably. Catholics still faced restrictions, yes, but they weren't being hunted the same way they were in the 1600s. Second problem, the differences between Catholic and Anglican beliefs weren't actually that different when it came to the things the song supposedly encodes. Both groups believed in the Ten Commandments, both believed in the four Gospels, both accepted the Apostles' Creed, though they might have counted the articles slightly differently. The things that really divided Catholics and Anglicans were matters of church authority, ritual, and emphasis, not the basic building blocks of Christian doctrine. Third problem, and this one's kind of funny when you think about it. If you were trying to secretly teach Catholic beliefs during a time when even mentioning your faith could get you killed, would you write a song that literally has the word Christmas in every single line? I mean, on the first day of Christmas, my true love gave to me. That's not exactly flying under the radar, is it? And fourth, there's no logical connection between most of the symbols and what they're supposed to represent. Why would 8 maids a-milking make you think of the 8 Beatitudes? How does 9 ladies dancing remind anyone of the fruits of the Holy Spirit? If you were creating a memory device to teach children, you'd want the symbols to actually help them remember, right? These connections feel forced, like someone working backward from a conclusion. When Snopes, the famous fact-checking website, investigated this claim, they tore it apart systematically. No historical documentation, no evidence in any Catholic writings from the persecution period. No mention in any contemporary accounts. Just nothing. Until Hugh McKellar's creative article in 1979. So why did so many people believe it? Here's what I think, and this is where the story gets really interesting from a human psychology perspective. We are meaning-making creatures. We love patterns. We love secret codes. We love the idea that there's more to something than meets the eye. Think about how many movies, books, and TV shows are based on exactly this premise: something hidden in plain sight, waiting for the clever person to decode it. We want our ancestors to have been clever and brave and creative in the face of oppression. And you know what? They absolutely were. The Catholics who survived persecution in England were unbelievably courageous. They risked everything to maintain their faith. But they probably didn't do it with this particular song. And there's something else. We live in an age of information overload, where everything can feel shallow and commercial, especially Christmas. The idea that there's this deep, profound meaning hidden in a silly song about birds and drummers, it makes Christmas feel more significant again, more connected to history, more real. It's the same reason people believe that Ring Around the Rosie is about the Black Plague, even though that's also been thoroughly debunked. It's why people think the candy cane was deliberately designed by a Christian candy maker to teach about Jesus, also not historically supported. We want our traditions to have deeper meanings. And honestly, that impulse isn't bad. It's actually kind of beautiful. But here's what I've learned in researching these stories. The truth is usually more interesting than the legend. And in this case, the truth is so much richer. Because the 12 Days of Christmas, the real song with its real history, is actually a window into something fascinating. It's a window into medieval and early modern Christmas celebrations that were so different from what we know today. It's a reflection of a time when Christmas wasn't just one day, but a nearly 2-week-long festival. When the period between Christmas and Epiphany was the wildest, most chaotic, most joyful time of the entire year. The song might not be a secret Catholic code, but it is a time capsule. It preserves memories of Twelfth Night celebrations, of gift-giving customs, of festive games played at parties where you had to remember increasingly ridiculous lists of items. It connects us to a way of celebrating that has almost entirely vanished from modern culture. And here's the beautiful irony. By trying to give the song a secret religious meaning, we almost missed its actual historical and cultural significance. We almost overlooked the real treasure while searching for an imaginary code. So where does that leave us? I think it leaves us with the choice. We can be disappointed that the romantic story isn't true, or we can be excited that the real story is waiting to be discovered. And trust me, over the next 11 parts of this journey, you're going to discover that the real history of the 12 Days of Christmas is filled with more chaos, more humor, more humanity, and yes, more meaning than any secret code could ever contain. Because the next thing you need to know, the real history of how Christmas almost disappeared entirely. How, for 13 years in England, Christmas was actually banned. Not by Catholic persecuting Protestants, but by Protestant Puritans who thought Christmas itself was too Catholic, too pagan, too fun, and how ordinary people rioted in the streets, demanding their right to celebrate. But that's a story for the next part of our journey, and I promise you, it's going to blow your mind. Imagine waking up on December 25th and being arrested for celebrating Christmas. Not for celebrating too loudly, or drinking too much, or causing trouble. Just for celebrating at all. For going to church. For cooking a special meal. For hanging a wreath on your door. Sounds impossible, right? Like some dystopian novel? Well, let me take you to England, 1647. Christmas has just been made illegal, and the story of what happened next, it's going to make you see those 2 turtle doves in a completely different light. Here's something most people don't know. Christmas has died before. Actually died. Not faded away, not become less popular. I mean literally banned by law, with soldiers enforcing it. And it happened in one of the most Christian countries in the world. The year is 1642. England is tearing itself apart in a civil war. On one side, King Charles III and his supporters, royalists who believed in traditional church ceremonies, elaborate rituals, and yes, festive Christmas celebrations. On the other side, Oliver Cromwell and his parliamentarians, devout Puritans who believed that the Church of England had become corrupted, too much like the Catholic Church, too focused on ceremony and not enough on scripture. And Christmas? To the Puritans, Christmas was everything wrong with Christianity wrapped up in a single day. Think about it from their perspective for a moment. They looked at Christmas and what did they see? They saw a holiday that wasn't in the Bible. Nowhere in Scripture does it say, "Thou shalt celebrate on December 25th. They saw a date that was clearly borrowed from pagan Roman festivals. They saw people getting drunk, playing games, feasting excessively, dressing up in costumes, and generally behaving in ways that had nothing to do with quiet, pious worship of God. To the Puritans, Christmas wasn't Christian. It was paganism wearing a Christian mask. Now, the Puritans had been complaining about Christmas for years, but in 1645, they finally had the power to do something about it. Parliament passed an ordinance declaring that Christmas should be a day of fasting and repentance, not feasting, but people largely ignored it. So in 1647, Parliament tried again. This time, they went all the way. Christmas was officially abolished. December 25th was to be a normal working day. Shops had to stay open. Markets had to operate. Any kind of special Christmas celebration, church services, decorations, special meals was illegal. And here's the kicker. They meant it. The government sent town criers through the streets announcing the new law. Soldiers patrolled to make sure shops stayed open. If you were caught preparing a Christmas dinner or attending a special church service, you could be fined, arrested, or worse. Can you imagine? Picture this. It's December 25th, 1647. You're in Canterbury, a town in southeastern England. You've celebrated Christmas your entire life. Your parents celebrated it. Your grandparents celebrated it. Going back generations, it's tradition, it's joy, it's community. And now, you're being told it's a crime. What would you do? Would you obey? Would you resist? The people of Canterbury chose to resist. On Christmas Day, 1647, despite the ban, despite the soldiers, despite the threat of punishment, the people of Canterbury decorated their town. They put up holly and ivy. They prepared feasts. They refused to open their shops. And when the authorities tried to force them to take down their decorations and get back to work, the town exploded. It started with angry words, then shoving, then a full-scale riot. Thousands of people filled the streets, demanding their right to celebrate Christmas. They attacked officials who tried to enforce the ban. They smashed windows of shops that had opened. The mayor fled. The soldiers couldn't control the crowd. For 3 days, Canterbury was in chaos, and Canterbury wasn't alone. In London, apprentices rioted, tearing down the parliamentary soldiers' barricades. In Norfolk, there were violent clashes. In Ipswich, crowds forced all the shops to close on Christmas Day. Across England, people risked everything, their safety, their freedom, their livelihoods, just to celebrate Christmas. Why? Why would people riot over a holiday? Because it wasn't really about the holiday itself. It was about something deeper. It was about the government telling you how to pray, what to believe, how to live your private life. It was about taking away something that connected you to your past, to your family, to your community. Christmas wasn't just a day. It was memory, tradition, identity. The Puritans thought they were purifying Christianity. The people thought they were being robbed of their humanity. And here's what's fascinating. The ban didn't work. For 13 years, 1647 to 1660, Christmas was officially illegal in England. But people kept celebrating anyway, just secretly. They'd gather in their homes behind locked doors. They'd prepare special meals but hide the food if soldiers came by. They'd sing carols quietly so the neighbours wouldn't hear. They created an underground Christmas. Sound familiar? It's almost exactly like the Catholic persecution we talked about in the first part. Except this time, it wasn't a religious minority being suppressed. It was the majority of ordinary English people, of all faiths, who just wanted to celebrate Christmas the way their ancestors had. There are these amazing diary entries from the period. One man wrote about how his wife made a plum pudding in secret, and they had to eat it quickly before anyone could report them. Another described how his children asked, with tears in their eyes, why Father Christmas? Yes, they already had that tradition. Why Father Christmas wasn't allowed to visit anymore. It's heartbreaking and infuriating and kind of darkly funny when you think about it. Because who bans Christmas? It's like banning sunshine or laughter. But the Puritans were serious. They published pamphlets with titles like A Vindication of Christmas that seriously argued, that Christmas celebrations were sinful and corrupt. One pamphlet claimed that more sin was committed on Christmas Day than any other day of the year. Another said that the money spent on Christmas feasts should be given to the poor instead. They weren't wrong about the inequality issue, but their solution, banning joy, wasn't exactly winning hearts and minds. Then, in 1660, everything changed. Oliver Cromwell died in 1658. His son briefly tried to hold power but failed. The people had had enough of Puritan rule. They invited King Charles II, son of the executed king, to return from exile and take the throne. This period is literally called the Restoration, because it restored the monarchy and it restored Christmas. The diarist Samuel Pepys, who documented everything about life in 17th century London, wrote with obvious joy about Christmas 1660. He described going to church, eating a roasted turkey, drinking wine, singing songs, visiting friends. After 13 years of silence, Christmas had a voice again. But here's what's interesting. Christmas came back, different. The ban had broken something. Before the Puritan period, Christmas had been wild, chaotic, almost pagan in its intensity. After the Restoration, it became more genteel, more focused on family and home rather than community riots. Festivities. The fear of losing it again made people hold it a little more carefully, a little more privately. And this brings us back to our song to those two turtle doves. In the symbolic interpretation, the one we now know probably isn't historically accurate, the two turtle doves represent the Old and New Testaments, two parts of the Bible, two covenants between God and humanity. But think about what doves actually symbolize: peace, gentleness, homemaking, pairs bonding for life. Maybe, just maybe, the real symbolism isn't about secret codes. Maybe it's about what we've been talking about, the pairing of tradition and survival, of the old ways and new circumstances. The two turtle doves are Christmas itself, something that almost died but survived, changed but still recognizable, persecuted but ultimately triumphant. Because that's what we're really talking about with these 12 days of Christmas. Not a secret religious code, but a survivor's song. A tradition that made it through bans, through wars, through cultural shifts, through centuries of people trying to control it, commercialize it, suppress it, or reshape it. Every generation thinks they're celebrating the real Christmas, and that everyone else has it wrong. The Puritans thought medieval Christmas was too pagan. The Victorians thought Georgian Christmas was too rowdy. We probably think Victorian Christmas was too sentimental. and our grandchildren will probably think our Christmas was too commercial. But you know what? Christmas keeps surviving. It keeps adapting. It keeps meaning something to people, even when, especially when, someone tries to take it away. So when you hear two turtle doves this year, maybe think about those people in Canterbury in 1647, rioting in the streets for their right to celebrate. Think about the families who secretly made plum pudding behind locked doors. Think about the children who wondered why Father Christmas stopped coming. Think about every tradition that someone somewhere had to fight to keep alive. Have you ever had a tradition, Christmas or otherwise, that someone tried to take from you, or that you had to fight to maintain? I'd love to hear about it in the comments, because understanding this, understanding that Christmas has always been contested, always been evolving, always been about more than just the surface celebration, it sets the stage for what comes next. And what comes next is going to surprise you even more, because we're about to dive into the strangest, most chaotic, most absolutely insane part of medieval Christmas celebrations. I'm talking about priests acting like donkeys in church. I'm talking about children being made bishops for a day. I'm talking about a tradition so wild, so anarchic, so completely upside down that the authorities spent centuries trying to stop it. We're about to enter the world of the Feast of Fools, the Lord of Misrule, and 3 French hens that represent something far more subversive than faith, hope, and charity. Trust me, you're not ready for this next part. Picture a medieval church on January 1st. Stone walls, stained glass, the smell of incense, everything you'd expect from a sacred space. Except, wait, why is there a donkey being led down the center aisle? Why are those priests wearing their robes inside out? And why is that young monk at the altar making donkey noises while the congregation responds with braying? Welcome to the Feast of Fools. And yes, this actually happened. In churches. Sanctioned by the very institution that was supposed to represent order, dignity, and divine authority. If the last section was about people fighting to keep Christmas alive, this section is about something even stranger. The times when the church itself went absolutely gloriously insane, on purpose. Let me set the scene properly, because this is one of those historical facts that sound so bizarre, you'd swear I'm making it up. But I promise you, this is real, documented, and it happened for centuries across medieval Europe. It's the late 1200s, somewhere in France. The 12 days of Christmas are in full swing. We've passed Christmas Day, we've passed St. Stephen's Day on December 26th, and now we're approaching New Year's Day, January 1st. In the church calendar, this day commemorates the Feast of the Circumcision of Christ, a solemn holy day marking when Jesus was circumcised and named according to Jewish law 8 days after his birth. Solemn, holy, dignified, except not even close. On this day, in cathedrals across France, Spain, and parts of Germany, something extraordinary happens. The lower clergy, we're talking about the deacons, subdeacons, the guys at the bottom of the church hierarchy, who normally just stand around and assist during services, these men take over. They elect one of their own as the Bishop of Fools or Pope of Fools. They put ceremonial robes on him, and then chaos. They process into the church wearing masks, dressed as women, dressed as animals, with their clothes backwards or inside out. They dance. They sing bawdy songs, and I mean songs that would make a sailor blush. They play dice games on the altar. They eat sausages and drink wine during the service. They burn old shoes in the censers instead of incense, filling the church with the smell of burning leather. Some accounts describe them bringing in a donkey and conducting a feast of the ass, where every response in the liturgy ends with hee-haw. I want you to really absorb this. This isn't happening in a tavern. This isn't a street festival. This is inside a church, during a religious service. And the church authorities allowed it. How? Why? What on earth was going on? Here's where it gets really interesting. The Feast of Fools wasn't some pagan holdover or secret rebellion. It was actually built into the official church calendar in many places. It was regulated. There were rules about how wild it could get, which, when you think about it, is hilarious. Yes, you can make donkey noises and wear your robes backward, but let's not get carried away. The practice seems to have evolved from even older Roman traditions, particularly Saturnalia, that ancient Roman festival in December where social roles were reversed. Masters served slaves, and chaos ruled for a few days. Early Christians incorporated some of this spirit into their midwinter celebrations, and over time it crystallized into these specific feast days during the 12 days of Christmas. But the church didn't just tolerate it. Some theologians actually defended it. There's this famous letter from the Faculty of Theology at the University of Paris, written around 1444, trying to explain why the Feast of Fools should be allowed to continue. Their argument? It's a pressure valve. They literally wrote, and I'm paraphrasing medieval Latin here, that we allow foolishness on certain days so that our foolishness doesn't burst forth at inappropriate times. Wine barrels, they said, would explode if you didn't occasionally open them to let out the gases. Human nature works the same way. Think about that logic for a second. The medieval church understood something profound about human psychology. You can't maintain strict control all the time. People need release. They need to laugh. They need to be ridiculous. And if you don't give them a sanctioned way to do it, they'll do it anyway, but in ways you can't control. So better to have one day a year where priests can dress up as fools, servants can mock their masters, and everyone can let loose, and then go back to normal the next day. It's the same principle behind the Lord of Misrule, another tradition that was huge during the medieval 12 days of Christmas. Wealthy households, university colleges, even the royal court would elect a Lord of Misrule, sometimes called the Abbot of Unreason, who would be in charge of the Christmas festivities from Christmas Day until Epiphany. This person's job was literally to organize pranks, games, entertainment, and general mayhem. In 1516, the English court spent the equivalent of about $4,000 in today's money on the Lord of Misrule's costume and props. Henry VI loved this tradition. Can you imagine? The King of England, defender of the faith, supporter of organized chaos. But my favorite part of this whole tradition is the boy bishop. This one's so strange and so sweet at the same time. On December 6th, the feast of St. Nicholas, church schools would elect one of the choir boys to be bishop for the day. Not pretend bishop, actual bishop. This child, usually around 10 to 12 years old, would be dressed in full episcopal robes, given a staff and mitre, and would actually conduct services. He'd preach sermons. Imagine a 10-year-old giving you a lecture about morality from the pulpit. He'd lead processions through town. He'd give blessings. And everyone, including the actual clergy, would have to treat him with the respect due to a bishop. This continued until December 28th, the Feast of the Holy Innocents, which commemorated King Herod's massacre of children in Bethlehem. So for 3 weeks, a child held one of the highest offices in the church. Why? Because Jesus said, "Let the children come to me," and, "Unless you become like little children, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven." The boy bishop was a living reminder that in God's eyes, the hierarchy we create doesn't mean much. Also, it was probably hilarious. Historical accounts mention boy bishops doing things like demanding that the adult clergy pay them money, or scolding their regular teachers from the pulpit. The adults had to just take it for 3 weeks. Now, not everyone thought this was a good idea. By the 1400s, church reformers were starting to complain that the Feast of Fools had gotten out of hand. There are records of synods trying to suppress it, bishops writing angry letters about deacons who got way too drunk and way too creative with their foolishness. Some celebrations apparently included mock baptisms using beer instead of water, or mock confessions where people confessed absurd sins like, "I helped an old lady across the street," or "I told the truth." The University of Paris letter I mentioned earlier, that was actually written to defend the practice after several bishops tried to ban it. The reformers were losing the argument, so they wrote treatises with titles like "Against the December Libertinage," arguing that such behavior profaned sacred spaces. But for centuries the tradition persisted, because people needed it. Medieval life was hard, brutally hard. You worked from sunup to sundown most days. You lived with constant threats of disease, famine, violence. The church preached about judgment, sin, hell, the weight of your soul's salvation. Everything was serious all the time, except for a few days in December and January, when the world turned upside down, when a beggar could be king, when a child could be bishop, when a priest could play the fool, and everyone for just a moment could breathe. So what about those 3 French hens? In the symbolic interpretation we explored earlier, they represent faith, hope, and charity, the 3 theological virtues from 1 Corinthians 13. Paul's famous love chapter ends with, "And now these 3 remain, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love, beautiful, meaningful, theologically rich." But knowing what we now know about medieval Christmas traditions, I can't help but see another layer. 3 French hens, French being exotic, foreign, fancy. Hens being common birds, domestic, female, associated with nurturing and home. 3 virtues that are both precious and ordinary. 3 principles that can survive being turned upside down, mocked, tested, and still remain true. Because that's what the Feast of Fools really tested, wasn't it? If your faith can't survive being laughed at, is it really faith? If your hope disappears when someone makes a joke, was it really hope? If your charity depends on maintaining dignity and hierarchy, is it really love? The medieval church, at its best, understood this. They understood that sacred things don't become less sacred when we're human about them, that God is big enough to handle our foolishness, our chaos, our need to occasionally dress up like donkeys and sing silly songs in church. Now, I'm not saying your church should start doing this again. Can you imagine? "Hey everyone, for next Sunday service, feel free to wear your clothes inside out and bring a donkey." I don't think that's going to fly in 2024, but maybe, just maybe, we've lost something. We've made everything so polished, so professional, so controlled. Our Christmas celebrations are scripted, scheduled, Instagrammed. There's no room for chaos, for foolishness, for the kind of wild, uncontrolled joy that might make us look ridiculous. Have you ever done something at Christmas that people thought was foolish or inappropriate? Ever broken the unspoken rules of how you're supposed to celebrate? I'm genuinely curious. Drop a comment and tell me about your personal Feast of Fools moment. Because as we move deeper into this journey through the 12 days of Christmas, we're going to see this theme keep appearing. The tension between control and chaos, between the sacred and the silly, between tradition and transformation. And the next stop on our journey, we're about to discover how a simple mistake, one misheard word, changed this song forever. We're going to uncover how medieval music went from being too rowdy for churches to becoming the carols we know today. And we're going to explore why 4 birds might be the most misunderstood gift in the entire song. The calling birds are calling, and their story is about to blow your mind in ways you never expected. For over 100 years, we've been singing about the wrong birds. Every Christmas, millions of people sing about 4 calling birds, imagining perhaps birds with beautiful songs, birds calling out melodiously across a winter landscape. Some people even picture exotic tropical birds with bright plumage calling to their mates. But that's not what the song originally said. The original lyrics, from the earliest printed versions in the late 1700s, said 4 collie birds, not calling, collie. And that one misheard word. It reveals something extraordinary about how traditions transform, how music evolves, and how the sacred and the silly have been dancing together for far longer than we realise. Let me take you back to where this song actually became a song, because for most of its existence, it wasn't one. When the 12 Days of Christmas first appeared in print in 1780, in a book called Mirth Without Mischief, it wasn't set to music at all. It was a memory game, a party game, the kind of thing people would recite at Christmas gatherings to test their recall and have a laugh when someone inevitably forgot whether it was 10 lords a-leaping or 9 ladies dancing. You'd sit around, probably drinking, definitely eating, and you'd go in a circle, each person adding the next verse, and the whole group would join in on the increasingly ridiculous repetition. 4 collie birds in that original version. Collie being an Old English dialect word for black. Coley. Collie birds were just blackbirds. Common, everyday blackbirds. Nothing exotic, nothing fancy. Just 4 plain black birds, probably chosen because they fit the rhythm and the cumulative counting structure. Now here's where it gets interesting. The song stayed that way, as a spoken chant, a party game, a bit of festive fun, for over a century. Different versions circulated with slight variations. Some had 9 drummers and 11 pipers instead of the other way around. Some included bears a-baiting or ships a-sailing. The gift-giver was sometimes a mother, sometimes a true love. It was fluid, changeable, the way oral traditions always are. And then, in 1909, a British composer named Frederick Austin changed everything. Austin took this old party game and set it to music, the melody we all know today, and in doing so he made some editorial choices. He smoothed out the rhythm. He adjusted some of the words for better singability. And somewhere in that process, 4 collie birds became 4 calling birds. Maybe he genuinely misheard it. Maybe he thought calling sounded more poetic, more musical. Maybe he'd never heard the word collie and assumed it must be calling. We don't know for certain. But his version, published by Novello, a major music publisher, became the standard, and within a generation almost everyone had forgotten that the birds were ever supposed to be black. This kind of linguistic drift happens all the time with songs and nursery rhymes. Ring Around the Rosie has like 50 different versions across English-speaking countries. London Bridge is Falling Down changes depending on where you are. But what makes this particular change fascinating is that it happened right at the moment when we were starting to write everything down, to standardize everything, to freeze traditions in place. The early 1900s were when musicologists and folklorists were rushing around trying to record and preserve traditional songs before they disappeared. And in doing so, they sometimes accidentally created new traditions. Austin's version of the 12 Days of Christmas became definitive not because it was more authentic, but because it was published, printed, distributed, and taught in schools. Within 2 decades, sheet music with Austin's melody was in homes across Britain and America. His arrangement became the arrangement, and 4 calling birds became the correct version, while the original collie birds slowly faded into obscurity. Now, you might be thinking, okay, Interesting linguistic history, but so what? What's the big deal? The big deal is this. It's a perfect example of how Christmas music, how all music tied to tradition, is constantly evolving, even when we think we're preserving it. And that tension between preservation and change, it's been playing out for centuries, especially with Christmas carols. Let me tell you about medieval carols because they were nothing like what you're imagining. The word carol comes from the Old French carol, which meant a circle dance accompanied by singing. Not a hymn, not a religious song, a dance. People would literally hold hands, form a circle and dance while singing, often outdoors, often at festivals, often with lyrics that were, let's say, earthy. Medieval carols were party songs. They were about love, about drinking, about the changing seasons, about poking fun at authority. Some were religious, sure, but even those often mix sacred imagery with very secular humour. There are surviving medieval carols with lines about kissing under the mistletoe, about bringing ivy and holly into the house to chase away winter, about eating and drinking until you couldn't move. One famous medieval carol from the 15th century goes, "Bring us in good ale, and bring us in good ale, for our blessed Lady's sake, bring us in good ale." It's literally a drinking song that name drops the Virgin Mary. That's the level of mixing we're talking about here. Another one, the Corpus Christi Carol, sounds sacred and mystical, but scholars have debated for decades whether it's actually about the Eucharist or about Arthurian romance, or both somehow mixed together. The line between religious and secular was fuzzy, porous, comfortable with contradiction. And the church hated it, or at least the serious clergy did. Remember how we talked in the last section about the Feast of Fools and controlled chaos? Well, carols represented uncontrolled chaos. People were dancing in circles, dancing, while singing about holy things. They were making up verses on the spot, adding bawdy jokes, getting rowdy. And they were doing this during church festivals, sometimes right outside church doors, sometimes even inside churches before or after services. So beginning in the late Middle Ages, various church councils tried to ban carols from churches. Not from Christianity entirely. People could sing them at home or in the streets, but not in the sacred space. The official church music was supposed to be Gregorian chant, plainchant, dignified Latin hymns sung by trained choirs, not these dance songs sung by common people in common languages about common things. But you know what happened? The same thing that happened with the Christmas ban we talked about earlier. People ignored it. They kept singing carols, they kept dancing, they kept mixing the sacred and the silly, and eventually the church gave up and absorbed them. By the late medieval period, you start seeing carols written specifically for church use, carols in Latin, carols that fit the liturgical calendar. But even these retained some of that folk energy, that bounce, that accessibility that the common people demanded. This is where the tradition of going door-to-door caroling comes from. Since you couldn't always sing these songs in church, people sang them everywhere else. They'd go from house to house during the 12 days of Christmas, singing carols and expecting to be invited in for food and drink. This was called wassailing, from the Anglo-Saxon phrase Wassail, meaning be in good health. Wassailers would show up at your door with a bowl, sing you songs, and you'd be expected to fill their bowl with wassail, a hot spice cider or ale drink, and give them food. If you were generous, they'd sing blessings for your household. If you were stingy, well, they had songs for that too, and they were not complimentary. There's a traditional wassailing song that goes, "We are not daily beggars that beg from door to door, but we are neighbours' children whom you have seen before. Love and joy come to you, and to you your wassail too, and God bless you and send you a happy new year. Sweet, right? But there are versions where, if you don't give them anything, the next verse is basically, fine, be that way. May your beer go sour and your chickens stop laying eggs. Medieval passive-aggressive at its finest. This tradition of going door-to-door singing also connects to the practice of wassailing orchards. In agricultural areas, especially in southern England, people would go out to the apple orchards on Twelfth Night, the last night of Christmas, and sing to the trees. They'd pour wassail on the roots, place toast soaked in wassail in the branches, and sing songs begging the trees to be fruitful in the coming year. Yes, singing to trees, while slightly drunk, at midnight. Because that's how you ensure a good apple harvest. This wasn't considered strange or pagan or inappropriate. It was just what you did. The line between Christian practice, agricultural tradition, and folk custom was non-existent. It was all woven together into one big, messy, joyful, slightly chaotic celebration of midwinter. So when we think about those 4 calling birds, or collie birds, or blackbirds, and their symbolic connection to the 4 Gospels, we need to hold all of this in our minds at once. Yes, if you wanted to create a symbolic interpretation, 4 birds representing Matthew, Mark, Luke and John makes perfect sense. The Gospels are the foundation of Christian teaching, the 4 witnesses to Christ's life and message. But also 4 blackbirds are just 4 blackbirds, common birds, birds you'd see every day in medieval England, birds you'd hear calling. Oh, maybe that's why the word changed. Birds you'd hear singing in the hedgerows and fields, sacred and ordinary at the same time, because that's what medieval Christianity actually was for most people. It wasn't this pure, transcendent thing separated from daily life. It was woven into everything. Your prayer life, and your work life, and your party life, and your music weren't in different boxes. They were all happening together, all the time, sometimes in ways that would scandalize us today. Those medieval carols I mentioned, many of them survived because they were written down in monasteries, copied by monks who apparently had no problem with preserving songs about drinking and kissing alongside sacred hymns. There's a manuscript from the early 1400s that contains both a carol about Christ's nativity and one that's basically advice on how to seduce someone at a Christmas party. Same manuscript, same scribes, no apparent cognitive dissonance, and I think that's beautiful in a way. Not that medieval people had lower standards, they didn't. They took their faith seriously, often more seriously than we do. But they understood that faith has to exist in the real world, with real people who drink and dance and make jokes and sometimes get the words wrong when they're singing. Which brings us full circle to Frederick Austin in 1909, mishearing collie as calling and accidentally creating a new tradition. Because that's how traditions work. They're not preserved in amber. They're living things, passed from person to person, generation to generation, changing slightly each time, adapting to new contexts, new languages, new understandings. The song you're singing this Christmas isn't the same song your great-great-great-grandparents sang. The carols you hear in church aren't the same carols medieval peasants sang in their villages, and that's okay. That's how it's supposed to work. Traditions that don't evolve die. What do you think? Do you prefer collie birds or calling birds? Does it matter? Does knowing the original change how you hear the song? I'm genuinely curious what you all think about this, because as we keep diving deeper into these 12 days, we're going to keep finding this pattern. Things aren't what we thought they were. The stories we've been told are often simplified or romanticized or just plain wrong. But the real stories, the messy, complicated, human stories are so much richer. And speaking of things not being what we thought, we're about to tackle possibly the biggest misconception in all of Christmas history, those 5 golden rings everyone sings about. We're going to discover they might not be rings at all, and we're going to explore the uncomfortable truth that Christmas, the date, the celebration, the whole December 25th thing, is built on a foundation of borrowed traditions, co-opted festivals, and strategic religious politics. The pagan roots of Christmas run deeper than you imagine, and the story of how Christianity absorbed, transformed, and claimed winter solstice celebrations is both fascinating and slightly scandalous. Get ready, because part 5 is going to challenge everything you thought you knew about why we celebrate when we do. What if I told you that Jesus wasn't born on December 25th? What if I told you that nobody, not the early Christians, not the gospel writers, not anyone, actually thought he was born on that date until hundreds of years after his death? And what if I told you that the church knew this and chose December 25th anyway, for reasons that had nothing to do with historical accuracy and everything to do with strategic religious politics? Oh, and those 5 golden rings everyone's been singing about for centuries? They might not be rings at all. They might be, well, we'll get to that. But first we need to talk about the single biggest act of cultural appropriation in Western history. It's December in Rome, around the year 350 AD. Christianity is no longer a persecuted minority faith. It's becoming the dominant religion of the Roman Empire. But there's a problem, a big problem. Every December, the Roman world erupts in celebration. Not for Christ, not for anything Christian, but for older gods, older traditions, older parties that have been happening for centuries before Jesus was even born. And these celebrations are popular. Really, really popular. The kind of popular where trying to stop them would probably cause riots. So the early church leaders faced a choice. They could fight these festivals head-on, try to suppress them, and risk massive backlash. Or they could do something cleverer, something that would echo through history and shape how billions of people celebrate for millennia to come. They could claim the date for themselves. Let me paint the picture of what December looked like in the Roman Empire before Christianity took over. Starting around December 17th, you had Saturnalia, the festival of Saturn, the god of agriculture and time. This was Rome's biggest party of the year. Everything stopped. Businesses closed, schools closed, law courts closed, social norms inverted. Masters served their slaves dinner. People wore casual clothes instead of togas. Gambling was allowed in public. Everyone exchanged gifts, usually small items like candles or figurines. People decorated their homes with greenery. They feasted. They drank. They sang in the streets. Sound familiar? It should. Saturnalia officially lasted for one day, December 17th, but in practice people kept partying for up to a week. And then, just as Saturnalia was winding down, you had the Calends, the Roman New Year celebration starting January 1st. More parties, more gift-giving, more general mayhem. But here's the key detail. December 25th specifically was celebrated as the birthday of Saul Invictus, the unconquered sun. This was a relatively new festival, established officially by Emperor Aurelian in 274 AD, but it drew on much older sun worship traditions. December 25th was chosen because it's right after the winter solstice when the days start getting longer again. The sun is reborn. The light conquers the darkness. Meanwhile, up in northern Europe, the Germanic and Norse peoples celebrated Yule, their own midwinter festival. They burned Yule logs, feasted on boar, decorated with evergreens, and told stories about the wild hunt, where Odin would ride across the sky with ghostly warriors. Yule lasted for 12 days. Yes, 12. From the winter solstice through New Year. Are you starting to see the pattern? Now, none of the Gospel writers give us a date for Jesus' birth. Matthew and Luke give us narratives, but no specific dates. Mark and John don't mention the birth at all. Early Christians didn't celebrate Christmas for the first few centuries of Christianity. They focused on Easter, the resurrection, as the central feast. Some early Christian writers tried to calculate when Jesus might have been born based on other dates mentioned in Scripture, and they came up with all kinds of answers. Some said March, some said April, some said September. One group in Egypt celebrated Christmas on January 6th, which would later become Epiphany. But nobody said December 25th for the first 300 years of Christianity. Then, in 354 AD, we have the first documented reference to December 25th being celebrated as Christ's Nativity, in Rome, in a document called the Chronography of 354, and by the end of the 4th century it had become standard across most of the Christian world. So what happened? Why did they suddenly decide on December 25th? A 4th century Christian writer named Dionysius Bar Salabi basically admitted the strategy. He wrote, "It was a custom of the pagans to celebrate on the same 25th of December the birthday of the sun, at which they kindled lights in token of festivity. In these solemnities and revelries, the Christians also took part. Accordingly, when the doctors of the church perceived that the Christians had a leaning to this festival, they took counsel and resolved that the true nativity should be solemnized on that day." Let me translate that from ancient Christian politeness into modern English. The people really liked partying on December 25th for the sun god's birthday, and they weren't going to stop, so we just made it about Jesus instead. It's brilliant when you think about it. Don't fight the culture. Absorb it. Transform it. Give people a familiar structure, the date, the feasting, the gift-giving, the greenery, the lights, but fill it with new meaning. The unconquered sun becomes the Son of God. The return of light becomes the light of the world. The gifts for Saturn become gifts commemorating the Magi's gifts to Christ. This strategy is called baptizing pagan customs, and the Church got really good at it. Easter absorbed spring fertility festivals and kept the eggs and rabbits. All Saints' Day absorbed Samhain and became Halloween. St. Brigid's Day absorbed the Celtic goddess Brigid. They literally just made her a saint and kept the same name and date. It's cultural jiu-jitsu. Use the momentum of existing traditions to spread your new religion. Now, before anyone gets upset, I want to be clear. This doesn't make Christmas fake, or not really Christian. Christianity has always existed in cultures, absorbing and transforming whatever it touches. That's not weakness. That's actually its superpower. The ability to translate divine truths into whatever cultural language people speak is why Christianity spread across the entire world. But it does mean that when you're hanging holly, or decorating a tree, or burning a Yule log, or exchanging gifts on December 25th, you're participating in traditions that are far older than Christianity. You're connected to Romans honouring Saturn, to Norse people celebrating Yule, to countless humans throughout history who gathered in the darkness of winter, lit fires against the cold, and celebrated the promise that the light would return. And that brings us to those 5 golden rings. In the symbolic interpretation, the one we've been exploring throughout this journey, 5 golden rings represent the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The Torah, the books that tell the story of creation, the fall, the flood, the patriarchs, the exodus from Egypt, the giving of the law. the foundation of Judeo-Christian understanding of humanity's relationship with God. Beautiful symbolism, perfectly fitting for the fifth day. 5 rings for 5 books, except they might not be rings at all. Ornithologists and historians have pointed out something fascinating. In the context of the song, which is listing a bunch of birds alongside these rings, the 5 golden rings might actually refer to ring-necked pheasants. Male ring-necked pheasants have distinctive golden rings around their necks. 5 male pheasants would be an expensive, impressive gift in medieval or early modern England, where pheasant hunting was a sport for the wealthy, and it would make the song make more sense structurally. 1st through 4th day, birds. 5th day, more birds. 6th through 7th day, birds. It's thematically consistent. Also, let's be honest, if someone gave you 5 actual golden rings for Christmas, that would be the weirdest gift breakdown in history. Why 5 rings? Who needs 5 golden rings? But 5 game birds? That's a feast. That's practical. That's something a wealthy suitor might actually give to impress his beloved and her family. We don't know for certain. The earliest versions of the song don't clarify. It could have been jewellery. It could have been pheasants. It could have shifted back and forth over time. Language is slippery. Traditions are slippery. Maybe it was deliberately ambiguous. A little joke. A double meaning. But here's what I love about this uncertainty. It reminds us that the symbols we assign to things are often more about us than about the things themselves. Whether the 5 golden rings are jewellery or pheasants, we can still see the Pentateuch in them if we want to. We can still find meaning. We can still connect the everyday and the sacred. Just like December 25th. The date itself is pagan in origin, yes. But billions of people have poured Christian meaning into it. They've made it holy through centuries of worship, through gathering together, through choosing to see the birth of Christ in the returning of the light. Meaning isn't found, it's made. And it's made by communities over time, through repetition and intention and love. The Romans looked at the winter solstice and saw the sun being reborn. The Norse looked at it and saw Odin riding the wild hunt. Medieval Christians looked at it and saw the Nativity. We look at it and see all of those things at once, layered on top of each other like a palimpsest, each generation adding its own meaning without completely erasing what came before. And honestly, that's more beautiful than if everything was original and pure and untouched by other cultures. Because it means Christmas belongs to everyone. It always has. It was never exclusively anything. It's always been a mixing, a borrowing, a transformation. When you string up lights on your house, you're participating in that ancient Roman tradition of lighting candles for Saturnalia. When you bring a tree inside and decorate it, you're echoing the Norse and Germanic reverence for evergreens in winter. When you feast with family, you're doing what humans have done at midwinter for thousands of years. And when you do all of this to celebrate the birth of Christ, you're adding your own layer to a tradition that spans millennia and cultures. That's not dilution. That's richness. That's depth. That's what makes Christmas endure. Here's my question for you. Does knowing the pagan origins of Christmas change how you feel about it? Does it make it feel less sacred or more connected to human history? I really want to know what you think. Drop a comment. Because understanding this, understanding that Christmas is built on layers of meaning, that nothing is as simple or pure as we think, it opens up the next part of our journey in a profound way. We're about to explore the day that was once more important than Christmas itself. The day that kings travelled to see Christ. The day when the divine was revealed to the world. January 6th, Epiphany, was the real climax of the Christmas season for most of Christian history. And those 6 geese are laying? They're about to connect us to the story of creation itself, to the cosmic drama of God making the world in 6 days. But more than that, we're going to discover why medieval Christians put the Epiphany at the centre of everything, and why that shift, from Epiphany to Christmas Day as the main event, tells us something profound about how Christianity changed as it moved from east to west, from ancient to modern, from mystery to sentimentality. The geese are waiting, and their eggs are about to crack open truths you never saw coming. There's a date that most Christians have forgotten, a date that, for over 1,000 years, was considered more sacred than December 25th, a date when emperors were crowned, when the greatest artistic masterpieces were commissioned, when entire cities would shut down for celebration, a date that, in many parts of the world, is still when children receive their Christmas gifts. January 6th, the Epiphany, the day the Magi arrived, the day God was revealed to the Gentiles, the day that, for early Christians, was the whole point of the Christmas season. And those 6 geese laying eggs, they're about to connect us to the very beginning of everything, to the moment when God said, "Let there be light," and creation began. Here's something that's going to sound strange to modern ears. For the first several centuries of Christianity, Epiphany was the big day. Not Christmas. Epiphany. In the Eastern Orthodox Church, which represents how Christianity was practiced for the first millennium before the Great Schism of 1054, Epiphany is still one of the most important feast days of the entire year. In Ethiopia, on January 19th, they use a different calendar. Hundreds of thousands of pilgrims converge on the ancient city of Aksum to celebrate Timkat, the Epiphany festival. They process through the streets carrying replicas of the Ark of the Covenant. They bathe in blessed water. They celebrate all night long. It's massive. It's spectacular. It makes most Western Christmas celebrations look quiet by comparison. In Spain and Latin America, January 6th, Dia de los Reyes, Three Kings Day, is when children traditionally receive their gifts. Not from Santa Claus, but from the 3 kings. Kids leave their shoes out the night before, filled with grass for the king's camels, and wake up to find presents left by Melchior, Caspar, and Balthazar. So what happened? Why did Western Christianity shift its focus from Epiphany to Christmas Day? And what does this tell us about how the meaning of the season changed over time? Let's start with the Magi themselves, because their story is way stranger and more mysterious than the Christmas pageants suggest. Matthew's Gospel, the only Gospel that mentions them, is frustratingly vague. It doesn't say there were 3 of them. It doesn't say they were kings. It doesn't give us their names. It just says Magi from the east came to Jerusalem asking about a newborn king following a star. The word Magi is important. In the ancient world, Magi were Persian priests, astronomers, wise men who studied the stars and practiced what we might call astrology. They weren't Jewish. They weren't even necessarily monotheistic. They were foreigners, outsiders, Gentiles, possibly Zoroastrian priests from Persia or Mesopotamia. And according to Matthew, these pagan stargazers were the first non-Jews to recognize Jesus as the Messiah, before the shepherds in Luke's Gospel, before anyone in Israel except Mary, Joseph, and maybe Elizabeth and Zechariah. These foreign mystics saw something in the stars that God's chosen people missed. Think about how radical that is. Think about what Matthew is saying. God announced his son's birth not through the religious establishment, not through the temple, not through the prophets, but through a cosmic event that pagan astronomers interpreted correctly, while Jewish religious leaders completely missed it. It's provocative. It's uncomfortable. It's exactly the kind of thing that would make Epiphany, the revealing of Christ to the Gentiles, a huge theological moment. Now let's talk about those gifts, because they're not random, and they're not just expensive presents. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Every Christmas pageant kid carries them. But what do they actually mean? Gold is obvious. It's a gift for a king. It acknowledges royalty, sovereignty, earthly power. The Magi are recognizing Jesus as the King of Kings. Frankincense is trickier. It's a resin burned as incense in temple worship. It's what priests used. So frankincense acknowledges Jesus' priestly role. He is the mediator between God and humanity. He's not just a political king, but a spiritual authority. Myrrh is the darkest one. Myrrh is what you use to prepare bodies for burial. It's a funeral spice. So at the very moment of celebrating this baby's birth, the Magi are acknowledging his death. They're saying, "We see you, newborn king." And we already know this story ends on a cross. Gold, frankincense, myrrh, king, priest, sacrifice. Birth and death held in the same moment. That's deep. That's profound. That's the kind of symbolism that early Christians meditated on, that theologians wrote treatises about, that artists tried to capture in their work. And here's what gets me. According to Matthew, the Magi didn't arrive at a stable. They arrived at a house. Mary and Joseph were living in Bethlehem by then. Some scholars think it might have been up to 2 years after Jesus' birth. Matthew says Herod, trying to kill Jesus, ordered all boys under 2 years old killed. 2 years. The Magi weren't part of the nativity scene at all. But we've smooshed the stories together. We put the Magi in the stable with the shepherds, even though they're from different gospels, different timelines, different theological points. We created a composite narrative that's more convenient, more photogenic, but historically questionable. The early church kept them separate. Christmas was about the birth, the incarnation, God becoming human, the scandal of divinity in diapers. Epiphany was about the revelation, the moment when the significance of that birth became known to the world. 2 events, 2 celebrations, 12 days apart, and those 6 geese are laying. In the symbolic interpretation, they represent the 6 days of creation from Genesis. Day 1, light. Day 2, sky. Day 3, land and plants. Day 4, sun, moon, stars. Day 5, fish and birds. Day 6, land animals and humans. 6 days of God making everything, culminating in humanity, culminating in the image of God walking in a garden. Geese laying eggs, creation, new life, the beginning of things. It's a perfect symbol for the creation story. Each egg contains potential, contains life waiting to hatch. Just like each day of creation built on the previous day, each one adding more complexity, more beauty, more possibility. And connecting this to Epiphany makes poetic sense, because Epiphany isn't just about the Magi. In the Eastern Church, Epiphany celebrates 3 events: the visit of the Magi, the baptism of Jesus in the Jordan, and Jesus' first miracle at the wedding in Cana. 3 showings of who Jesus is, 3 revelations, and all 3 involve water in a way. The Magi cross deserts to reach water, to reach a land that sustains life. Jesus is baptized in water, the same element present at creation when the Spirit hovered over the waters. Jesus turns water into wine, transforming the basic element of life into something better, something celebratory. Water, creation, revelation, transformation, it's all woven together. In many Orthodox traditions, Epiphany is when the priest blesses water, rivers, lakes, even the ocean. People plunge into freezing water to retrieve blessed crosses. It's intense, it's physical, it's about purification and renewal, and remembering that God made all of this, the water, the world, us, and called it good. Compare that to how we celebrate Christmas in the West. It's become so focused on the baby, the sentimentality, the cuteness of the nativity, which is beautiful, don't get me wrong, but we've lost some of that cosmic theological weight that Epiphany carries. The shift happened gradually, over centuries, as Christianity spread west and north from the Mediterranean, as it adapted to different cultures and climates, as it became less Eastern and more European, the emphasis changed. The Western Church wanted a celebration that felt more intimate, more accessible, more centered on home and family. Christmas Day, with its focus on a baby born in humble circumstances, fit that better than Epiphany, with its mystical Eastern magi and cosmic revelations. By the High Middle Ages, Christmas had eclipsed Epiphany in Western Europe, not replaced it. Epiphany was still celebrated, still important, but Christmas became the focal point, the main event. And as Western Christianity spread through colonization and missionary work, that emphasis spread too. Today, most Americans couldn't tell you what Epiphany is or when it occurs. Some churches have a service, sure. Some people know about Three Kings Day. But it's not a holiday. You don't get the day off work. There are no Epiphany sales at the mall. We've forgotten that for over half of Christian history this was the day. This was the climax of the Christmas season. The 12 days weren't counting up to nothing. They were building toward Epiphany, toward that moment of revelation and cosmic significance. And I think we've lost something in that forgetting. We've lost the sense of Christmas being about more than just our feelings, our families, our traditions. We've lost the universal scope, the idea that Christ came for everyone, that the gospel is for all nations, that God's revelation breaks every boundary we try to put around it. The Magi represent something essential. Faith isn't about being an insider. The shepherds, poor Jewish outsiders, came first in Luke's gospel. The Magi, rich Gentile outsiders, came first in Matthew's. The insiders, the religious establishment, the people who should have known, they missed it entirely, or worse, they tried to kill it. That's an uncomfortable message. It suggests that being in doesn't guarantee you'll recognize truth when you see it. That sometimes the people furthest from the center see most clearly, that God's ways of revealing himself are surprising, unsettling, not controllable. Do you ever feel like an outsider in religious spaces, or in Christmas celebrations? Do you ever feel like the Magi, following something you barely understand, traveling a long distance, not quite sure what you'll find when you get there? I think a lot of us feel that way, actually. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's the point. Because the Epiphany message is this: you don't have to be an insider to encounter God. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't even have to be part of the right religion. You just have to be paying attention. You just have to follow the light you see, even if you're not sure where it's leading. The Magi didn't have the Hebrew scriptures memorized. They didn't know the prophecies. They just looked at the stars and said, "Something important is happening. We should go." And they went. And they found what they are looking for. And when they found it, when they saw the child, Matthew says they were overwhelmed with joy. Not politely pleased, not religiously satisfied. Overwhelmed. The Greek word suggests being thrown into rapture, into ecstasy. That's what revelation does. That's what Epiphany means. Not just, oh, that's interesting, but oh my God, everything just changed. I see now. I understand. It's that moment of clarity, of truth breaking through, of suddenly getting it. Have you ever had an epiphany, religious or otherwise? That moment when something clicks into place and you see everything differently. That's what this feast day is celebrating. That's what those geese-laying eggs symbolize, the hatching of new understanding, the birth of new life, the beginning of seeing the world as it really is. And that brings us to the next phase of our journey, to the moment when all of this reaches its peak. Because Twelfth Night, the evening of January 5th, the night before Epiphany, was the wildest, most chaotic, most joyful night of the entire medieval year. It was when all the suppressed chaos, all the festive energy, all the misrule and celebration came to a head before everything returned to normal. 7 swans are about to swim into view, and with them we're entering the most ecstatic, most transformative part of the Christmas season. We're going to talk about Shakespeare, about cakes with hidden beans, about wassailing apple trees, and about why sometimes you need to turn the world completely upside down before you can see it right side up. The swans are waiting in their graceful mystery, and their story is going to take us places you never expected. It's the evening of January 5th, sometime around 1601. You're standing in the Great Hall of Whitehall Palace in London, watching what might be the most expensive party in England that year. Queen Elizabeth III, the Virgin Queen, Gloriana, the most powerful woman in the world, is hosting an Italian diplomat, and she's commissioned a new play for the occasion. A comedy about mistaken identity, unrequited love, and chaos. The play is called Twelfth Night, or What You Will, and William Shakespeare is about to capture, in comedy form, everything that this wild night represents. Transformation, madness, the beautiful confusion of a world turned upside down. Welcome to Twelfth Night, the last hurrah, the grand finale, the moment when 12 days of celebration reach their absolute glorious peak before everything returns to ordinary life. And those 7 swans swimming, they're about to lead us into mysteries both sacred and profane, into a night when anything could happen, and usually did. Let me tell you what made Twelfth Night so special, so wild, so important, that even 400 years later, we still reference it. First, the basics. Twelfth Night is the evening of January 5th, the 12th night counting from Christmas Day as the first night. It's the eve of Epiphany, the night before the Magi arrive, the last night of the Christmas season. And medieval and early modern Europeans celebrated this night like it was their last party on earth, because in a way, it was. After Twelfth Night, Christmas was over. The decorations came down, work resumed, the festive period ended. Normal life, with all its hierarchies, rules and restrictions, came crashing back. So Twelfth Night was the final explosion of joy, the last chance to be wild, the ultimate celebration before reality set in, and people went all out. The centerpiece of most Twelfth Night celebrations was the Twelfth Night cake. This wasn't just any cake. This was an elaborate, decorated masterpiece, often gilded with gold leaf, adorned with fancy icing, made with expensive spices and dried fruits. But here's the twist. Hidden inside the cake was a dried bean, sometimes also a dried pea. When the cake was cut and served, whoever found the bean in their slice became the king of the bean, the lord of misrule for the night. If there was a pea, whoever found it became the queen. And here's the radical part. It didn't matter who you were. You could be a servant, a peasant, a stable boy. If you got the bean, you were king for the night. Everyone had to obey your ridiculous commands. You got to order the actual nobles around. You got to make up games and rules and general chaos. Can you imagine the tension, the excitement? You're slicing into this cake, and you don't know if the next piece will completely upend the social order for the evening. A kitchen maid could become queen and order the lady of the house to serve her wine. A stable boy could become king and make the lord do ridiculous dances. This wasn't just silly fun, though it was definitely that. It was symbolic. It was a reminder that fortune is fickle, that status is temporary, that any of us could be brought low or raised high by chance. It echoed Mary's song in Luke's Gospel. He has brought down rulers from their thrones, but has lifted up the humble. The wealthy especially loved this tradition because it let them play at being humble for a night. Tudor nobles would spend fortunes on Twelfth Night celebrations. There are records from Henry VIII's court showing that they spent more on Twelfth Night festivities than on Christmas Day itself. Elaborate banquets, masks and plays, costumes and decorations, music and dancing until dawn, and then there's Shakespeare's play. Twelfth Night was written and first performed around 1601 or 1602. Scholars debate the exact date. The play was clearly designed for a Twelfth Night celebration, possibly that diplomatic event at Whitehall, possibly for another wealthy patron's party. And it captures the spirit of the night perfectly. The plot is wonderfully chaotic. Viola disguises herself as a man named Cesario. Duke Orsino loves Olivia, but Olivia falls in love with Cesario, who's actually Viola. Viola loves Orsino but can't tell him because she's pretending to be a man. Meanwhile, Olivia's household is pulled into elaborate pranks involving forged letters, yellow stockings, and a steward who thinks he's going to marry his mistress. There's drunkenness, sword fights, confusion, and eventually, when Viola's twin brother Sebastian shows up, double the confusion. Gender bending, social climbing, mistaken identities, servants pranking their masters, love making fools of everyone regardless of rank, and running through it all, the character of Festa the Fool, the wise fool who sees and speaks truth while everyone else is trapped in their illusions. Sound familiar? It's the Lord of Misrule in dramatic form. It's Twelfth Night itself made into a story, and the play ends with everything being resolved, but not before everyone has been thoroughly confused, humiliated, enlightened, and transformed. The closing song, sung by Feste, has this haunting refrain, "For the rain, it raineth every day." Life goes on, the party ends, reality returns. But for a few hours we lived in a different world. That's what Twelfth Night was about. Living in a different world. A world where the rules were suspended, where possibility hung in the air like snow, where you could be anyone, do anything before the dawn came and everything went back to normal. But here's what I love. In some communities, Twelfth Night wasn't just about humans partying. It was about including the whole world in the celebration. Which brings us to one of the strangest and most beautiful traditions I've encountered. Wassailing the apple trees. Picture this. It's late on Twelfth Night, close to midnight. You're in Somerset or Devon, or one of the apple-growing regions of southern England. A group of people emerges from the village carrying torches, carrying a large bowl of wassail, that hot, spiced cider we talked about earlier. They're singing as they process toward the orchards. When they reach the apple trees, they pour wassail onto the roots. They place pieces of toast soaked in wassail in the branches. They fire guns into the air to scare away evil spirits. And they sing to the trees. They literally sing songs asking, begging, commanding the trees to be fruitful in the coming year. One traditional wassailing song goes, "Old apple tree, we'll wassail thee, and hoping thou wilt bear. The Lord does know where we shall be to be merry another year. To blow well and to bear well, and so merry let us be. Let every man drink up his cup, and health to the apple tree." Is this Christian? Is it pagan? Is it agricultural practicality dressed up in ritual? Yes to all of the above. It doesn't matter. What matters is that people felt a connection to the trees, to the land, to the cycles of growth and harvest. They felt that everything, including trees, deserved to be included in the celebration. That blessing should be spread as widely as possible. And there's something so human about it, isn't there? Standing in the cold, slightly drunk, singing to trees, hoping for a good harvest. It's vulnerable. It's hopeful. It's acknowledging that you're dependent on forces beyond your control and you're doing the only thing you can do. Asking, hoping, celebrating anyway. This brings us to those 7 swans swimming in our song. Swans are extraordinary birds. They mate for life. They're graceful, beautiful, powerful. They can break your arm with their wings if they feel threatened. They're associated with transformation in mythology. Think of the ugly duckling becoming a swan, or the swan maidens who could shift between human and bird form. In the symbolic interpretation, 7 swans represent the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit from Isaiah 11. Wisdom, understanding, counsel, fortitude, knowledge, piety, and fear of the Lord. Or they represent the 7 sacraments of the Catholic Church: baptism, confirmation, Eucharist, confession, marriage, holy orders, and anointing of the sick. 7 gifts that transform you. 7 rituals that mark the stages of your life. 7 ways of encountering the sacred. But I also think swans are perfect for Twelfth Night for another reason. They float on the surface so gracefully, but beneath the water, their feet are paddling furiously. They look serene, but they're working hard. That's Twelfth Night too. It looks like chaos and play, but underneath, there's a deep spiritual work happening, a transformation, a preparing to return to ordinary life changed by what you've experienced. Because that's the real gift of these 12 days, isn't it? They give you permission to step outside normal life, to play, to feast, to celebrate, to turn things upside down, and in doing so, they change you. When you go back to work on January 7th, you're different. You've remembered that life is more than just work and obligation. You've tasted joy. You've experienced community. You've been reminded that the world is stranger and more wonderful than the everyday grind suggests. The medieval church understood something that we've largely forgotten. Human beings need festivals. We need time outside of time. We need permission to be ridiculous, to be lavish, to spend resources on joy rather than productivity. We need a feast so that we can fast. We need to celebrate so that we can endure. Modern life has largely lost this rhythm. We work year-round with maybe a week or 2 of vacation. We're always productive, always optimized, always on. We've forgotten how to truly rest, how to truly celebrate. Christmas has become one day, or maybe 2 if you count Christmas Eve, and then it's immediately back to normal. The decorations come down, the sales begin, time to focus on New Year's resolutions and productivity and getting back on track. But 12 days? 12 days of escalating celebration culminating in a night of glorious chaos. That's a rhythm that acknowledges human need. That's a rhythm that might actually be healthy. What would it look like to reclaim some of this? I'm not saying we should all start singing to trees at midnight, though honestly that sounds kind of amazing. But what if we treated the time between Christmas and Epiphany as sacred space? What if we protected it from work, from obligation, from the tyranny of productivity? What if we threw a 12th night party? What if we baked a cake with a bean in it and let chance determine who gets to be ridiculous for an evening? What if we gave ourselves permission to celebrate for more than one day? I'm curious. How long does Christmas last in your house? Do you take decorations down the day after? Do you keep them up through New Year's? Do any of you actually celebrate through Epiphany? Let me know in the comments. Because understanding these rhythms, understanding why our ancestors structured time this way, it might help us understand what we've lost and what we might want to reclaim. And that brings us to the next layer of our journey, to a place where the celebration takes a more sobering turn. We've been building and building, reaching peaks of joy and chaos. But now we need to talk about the other side, the underbelly. The reality that all of this festivity was happening in a world of deep inequality, where some people got to be kings for a night and others were actually servants every single day. 8 maids are about to enter our story, and they're going to force us to confront some uncomfortable truths about medieval Christmas, about who got to celebrate and who had to serve, about the difference between temporarily playing at humility and actually living in poverty, about what it means when the worst job in England gets a symbolic place in a Christmas song. The maids are coming with their milk pails, and their story is going to challenge everything we've been celebrating. The romantic image of Christmas past often shows us rosy-cheeked peasants and noble lords all feasting together, all equal for one magical day. It shows us servants becoming kings and kings serving servants, everyone laughing, everyone sharing the joy. But here's what that image doesn't show you. The milkmaid waking up at 3 a.m. on December 26th, her hands cracked and bleeding from the cold, walking through the dark to milk cows that don't care what day it is. It doesn't show you that while the Lord of Misrule played at being a servant for one evening, she was actually a servant every single day, for her entire life. Those 8 maids are milking? They're about to tell us a story that's uncomfortable, necessary, and ultimately, surprisingly hopeful. Because sometimes the most radical thing about a tradition isn't what it claims to do, but what it accidentally reveals about the world it came from. Let me take you into the life of a milkmaid in medieval and early modern England, because it's important to understand exactly what we're talking about when we sing about 8 maids a milking. Milking cows was one of the lowest, hardest, worst-paid jobs you could have. It was always given to women, usually young women or girls, and it was back-breaking work. You'd wake before dawn every single day, including Christmas, because cows need to be milked whether it's a feast day or not. You'd walk to the barn or the field, often in freezing temperatures. Your hands would be numb, your back would ache from bending over and squatting, and the cows, they didn't always cooperate. They kicked, they stepped on your feet, they swished their filthy tails in your face. Then you'd carry heavy buckets of milk back to the dairy, and your day was just beginning. You'd have to process the milk, skim the cream, make butter, make cheese, all day, every day, for wages that were typically half of what a male agricultural labourer made, and the social status at the very bottom, below craftsmen, below regular farm labourers, below almost everyone except perhaps beggars and criminals. If you were a milkmaid, you were considered crude, uneducated, probably promiscuous. There were all sorts of stereotypes. The phrase, "no better than a milkmaid," was an insult. So when our Christmas song includes 8 maids a milking as one of the gifts from a true love, what's happening there? On one level, it's absurd. Who wants 8 milkmaids as a gift? What are you supposed to do with them? But on another level, maybe it's saying something interesting. Even the lowest, the humblest, the most overlooked workers have a place in the celebration. Even they deserve to be seen, acknowledged, given symbolic value. Because in the symbolic interpretation, these 8 maids represent the 8 Beatitudes, those radical teachings from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Read those again. Really hear them. They're turning the entire world upside down. They're saying that the people society considers blessed, the rich, the powerful, the successful, the winners, aren't blessed at all. The truly blessed are the poor, the mourners, the meek, the persecuted, the milkmaids. And this wasn't just beautiful poetry. This is explosive social commentary. It's revolutionary. It's saying that God's values are the opposite of human values, that the hierarchy we've created is backwards, that the first shall be last and the last shall be first. So connecting the milkmaids to the Beatitudes, that's actually perfect. That's saying the person with the worst job, the lowest status, the least respect, she's the one who's closest to the kingdom of heaven, not the lords, not the ladies, not even the moderately successful merchants. The milkmaid. Now, did medieval society actually believe this and act on it? That's complicated. There was a tradition on St. Stephen's Day, December 26th, the day after Christmas, what we now call Boxing Day, of giving gifts to servants and the poor. This wasn't optional. If you were wealthy, you were expected to give. There are account books from medieval manors showing careful records of what was distributed: money, food, clothing, sometimes practical items like shoes or tools. And here's where the term piggy bank comes from. This is one of my favourite historical details. Wealthy households would collect money in hollow clay pots throughout the year. These pots had a slit on top where you could drop coins in, but no way to get them out except by breaking the pot. On Boxing Day, the pot would be ceremonially smashed, and the money inside would be distributed to servants and the poor. These clay pots were called pig jars in Middle English, pig being a type of orange clay. Over time, the word and the association merged, and someone started making these jars in the shape of pigs, and that's how we got piggy banks. A Boxing Day charity tradition turned into a cute savings device for children. But here's the uncomfortable question. Is this charity, or is it something else? Because Boxing Day giving wasn't really voluntary, it was expected. If you didn't give, if you were known as stingy, your reputation would suffer, your servants might leave, your community might ostracize you. So you gave, but you gave what was expected, what was appropriate to your station. Not too much, not too little, just enough to maintain the system, and the system depended on everyone staying in their place. Yes, on Boxing Day the servants got gifts and maybe a day off. Yes, on Twelfth Night a servant could become Lord of Misrule for one evening. But then, back to reality, back to milking cows at 3 a.m, back to being at the bottom of the social ladder. This is the tension at the heart of medieval Christmas charity. It's simultaneously genuine and performative. It's both an expression of Christian values and a way of maintaining the status quo. It acknowledges inequality while doing almost nothing to actually change it. There's a reason the Beatitudes say, "Blessed are the poor," and not, "Let's eliminate poverty." They promise spiritual blessing, heavenly reward, but not necessarily earthly justice, which is convenient if you're wealthy, isn't it? You can tell the poor they're blessed while keeping all your wealth. Now, I'm not trying to be cynical here. I genuinely believe many wealthy medieval Christians took their responsibility to the poor seriously. There are records of nobles personally serving the poor on Christmas, of washing the feet of beggars, of hosting massive feasts where anyone could come and eat. Some took the Beatitudes to heart. But structurally, systematically, Christmas charity didn't threaten the hierarchy. It reinforced it. It reminded everyone of their place. The wealthy were reminded they had a duty to give. The poor were reminded they should be grateful for what they received. Everyone played their role in a carefully choreographed dance of inequality disguised as generosity. And yet, there's something subversive hiding in there anyway. Because once you start saying that the poor are blessed, that the meek will inherit the earth, that the last shall be first, even if you don't really mean it, even if it's just symbolic, you've planted a seed. You've introduced an idea that won't stay contained. Think about it. For centuries, the Church taught the Beatitudes. For centuries, Christmas celebrations included some element of role reversal, some acknowledgement that the poor and humble were important. And slowly, gradually, over hundreds of years, that idea took root. It contributed to movements for social reform, to labour rights, to the idea that maybe, just maybe, everyone deserves dignity, not just symbolically for one day a year, but actually all the time. I'm not saying Christmas created social justice movements. That would be too simplistic. But I am saying that traditions carry ideas, and ideas have consequences, even when those consequences take centuries to unfold. The milkmaids in our song, representing the Beatitudes, are a small example of a bigger pattern. Marginalized people being given symbolic importance in religious and cultural traditions, and that symbolism eventually, slowly, imperfectly, starting to mean something real. Here's a question for you. Do you think symbolic gestures matter? Can celebrating someone for one day a year make a difference, even if their actual life doesn't change? Or is that just, I don't know, feel-good hypocrisy? I genuinely want to know what you think, because I'm torn. Part of me looks at medieval Boxing Day charity and sees genuine compassion, people doing what they could within their understanding. Part of me sees a system using charity to avoid justice, using temporary kindness to excuse permanent inequality. Maybe both are true. Maybe most things are complicated like that. What I do know is this. Those actual milkmaids, the real women who woke up at 3 a.m. on freezing mornings to milk cows, they didn't get much from medieval Christmas. They probably got a day off on Christmas Day itself if they were lucky. They probably got a small gift on Boxing Day. They probably got to eat better food than usual during the feast days if their employers were generous. But they were still milkmaids on December 27th. Still poor, still at the bottom, still doing backbreaking work for terrible wages. And that's the reality that runs underneath all our romantic notions of medieval Christmas. The feasts, the games, the Lord of Misrule, the wassailing, the Twelfth Night parties, all of that was real, and people genuinely enjoyed it. But it was all happening in a world of brutal inequality, where your birth determined your entire life, where being born a milkmaid's daughter meant you'd probably die a milkmaid yourself. The 8 maids a milking, blessed by the Beatitudes but not actually helped by them, are a reminder that celebration and justice aren't the same thing, that you can acknowledge someone's value while doing nothing about their suffering. That symbolism is easier than change. But here's why I think they're still worth including in our song, worth thinking about, because they remind us to ask the question. They make us uncomfortable. They force us to wonder who's missing from our celebrations, who's doing the work that makes our parties possible, who we're overlooking while we feast. Every Christmas, someone is working. Someone is milking the cows, or the modern equivalent. Someone is stocking the grocery store shelves at 4 a.m. so you can buy ingredients for your feast. Someone is delivering packages. Someone is working a hospital shift. Someone is cleaning hotel rooms for people on vacation. Someone is doing the necessary invisible labor that keeps everything running while others celebrate. Do we see them? Do we acknowledge them? Do we give them more than symbolic value? That's the question the 8 maids are asking us. And it's a hard question. It's easier to just sing the song and move on. But if we're going to really understand these 12 days, if we're going to excavate the full meaning of this tradition, we have to sit with the discomfort. We have to let the milkmaids challenge us. And that uncomfortable awareness is going to deepen as we move forward, because the next part of our journey takes us even further into the contradictions of medieval celebration. We're about to encounter 9 ladies dancing, and we're going to have to talk about women's roles, about bodies, about pleasure, about why the medieval church was simultaneously celebrating dance and trying to control it. The ladies are waiting, their skirts swirling, and their story is going to spin us into questions about joy, control, and what happens when the body refuses to stay reverent and insists on moving, dancing, celebrating in ways that make authorities nervous. The dance is about to begin, and it's going to be more complicated than you expect. There's a moment in a medieval church council document from the 13th century where a bishop complains, and I'm paraphrasing, that women are dancing in circles in the churchyard while singing songs that would make a grown man blush. His solution? Ban the dancing. The women's response? They kept dancing anyway, just somewhere else. This tension between the church wanting to control bodies and bodies insisting on moving, on celebrating, on dancing, runs through the entire history of Christmas. And nowhere is it more visible than in the story of those 9 ladies dancing. Because dancing in medieval Christianity was both holy and dangerous. It was worship and temptation. It was the body praising God and the body threatening to escape control. And women dancing, that was the most dangerous thing of all. Let's start with what 9 ladies dancing might have actually looked like in medieval England, because it's not what you're imagining. When we think of medieval dance, we might picture elegant ballroom dances, maybe some courtly gavotte or stately pavane. And yes, those existed, in wealthy courts, performed by trained dancers for entertainment, but that's not what most people experienced. Most people experienced carol dancing. Carol, which we've mentioned before as the root of the word carol, was a circle dance. Men and women would join hands, form a ring, and move in a circle while singing. Sometimes there was a leader in the middle who would call out verses, and the circle would respond with a refrain. Sometimes people would break into smaller groups and weave patterns. Sometimes the dancing got wild, with people leaping and spinning, and this happened everywhere. In village greens, in churchyards after services, in the courtyards of castles, during every major festival, especially Christmas. The thing is, carol dancing was communal. It wasn't about showing off individual skill. It was about moving together, singing together, being in rhythm with your community. Your body pressed against other bodies, your voice blended with other voices. You got hot, sweaty, breathless, exhilarated. It was intimate, physical, potentially arousing, and the church had feelings about this. On one hand, King David danced before the Ark of the Covenant in the Bible. The Psalms constantly talk about praising God with dancing. There was clear scriptural precedent for dance as worship. Plus, people loved it. Trying to ban something people loved, something that was woven into the fabric of every celebration, that was going to cause problems. On the other hand, dancing involved bodies touching, people getting excited, often late at night, often with alcohol involved. It was one short step from holy celebration to other things the church was very concerned about controlling. So the compromise was, dancing was fine, but controlled, supervised, done at appropriate times, like Christmas festivals, but not during Mass itself. We talked earlier about how carols got banned from inside churches. That's part of this same tension. You could dance in celebration of religious festivals, but not in ways that distracted from religious solemnity. The irony, of course, is that telling people they can't do something often makes them want to do it more. Which brings us to mumming and Morris dancing, two traditions that became hugely popular during the medieval Christmas season and which the authorities spent centuries trying to control with limited success. Mumming was a form of folk theatre where people would dress in costumes, often wearing masks or with faces blackened, and go door to door performing little plays or skits. These performances often involved dancing, music, mock fights, and generally chaotic behaviour. The performers would expect food, drink, and money in return. Morris dancing, which might derive from Moorish dancing, though the etymology is debated, involved groups of men, usually, performing choreographed dances with bells strapped to their legs, carrying handkerchiefs or sticks, sometimes accompanied by hobby horses or other folk characters. These dances were energetic, physical, impressive displays of coordination and stamina. Both traditions were associated with Christmas, especially the period between Christmas and Epiphany, and both made authorities nervous. Why? Because they involved disguise. When you're wearing a mask or your face is blackened with soot, you're anonymous. You can do things, say things, that you couldn't do as yourself. Social boundaries blur. Men might dress as women. Servants might mock their masters. The usual rules of propriety don't apply. And when women participated, which they did despite attempts to exclude them, it was even more scandalous. Because women's bodies in motion, women's voices raised in song, women taking up space and being loud and physical. That challenged the medieval ideal of feminine behaviour, quiet, modest, still, controlled. There's this amazing tradition called St. Distaff's Day on January 7th that perfectly captures this tension. The distaff was the stick used in spinning thread, women's work. So St. Distaff's Day, which isn't actually a saint's day, it's a folk name, was the day when women were supposed to return to their spinning after the Christmas holidays. But it became a day of misrule between the sexes. Men would try to set women's flax on fire as a prank. Women would retaliate by dousing men with water. It was a day of gender war, playful but also pointed. Everyone was supposed to go back to work, but nobody wanted to. Everyone was supposed to return to their proper roles, but for one more day those roles could be challenged. And running through all of this, the carol dancing, the mumming, the Morris dancing, the gender pranks of St. Distaff's Day, is this constant negotiation over women's bodies and women's participation in public celebration. Medieval society wanted women to be present. Celebrations weren't complete without both sexes participating. But it also wanted women to be modest, controlled, not too visible, not too loud, not too physical. Dancing threatened all of that. Dancing made you visible. Dancing made you physical. Dancing made you sweat and breathe hard and take up space. So there were rules. Women could dance in groups, but not alone. They could dance during festivals, but not just any time. They could dance certain dances, but not others. They should be chaperoned, supervised, kept within bounds. And yet, the ladies kept dancing. Because dancing is joy. Dancing is freedom. Dancing is your body doing what it wants to do, not what it's told to do. In the symbolic interpretation, 9 ladies dancing represent the 9 fruits of the Holy Spirit from Galatians chapter 5. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Notice that last one? Self-control. It's right there in the list of spiritual fruits. The idea that controlling yourself, especially controlling your body and your impulses, is a sign of spiritual maturity, of divine grace. But here's the paradox. Most of the other fruits on that list are about expansion, not control. Love, joy, peace. These are things that overflow, that you can't contain. Joy, especially. You can't have controlled joy. That's not how joy works. Joy makes you laugh too loud. Joy makes you dance without caring who's watching. Joy is the opposite of self-control. So which is it? Are we supposed to be full of joy or full of self-control? Are we supposed to dance or be still? The medieval church tried to have it both ways. Yes, celebrate with joy, but not too much joy. Yes, dance, but not too wildly. Yes, be physical, but remain modest. It's a tightrope, and nobody walks it perfectly. I think that's why 9 ladies dancing is such a perfect image for this tension. Ladies, implying nobility, refinement, proper behaviour. Dancing, implying movement, physicality, potential loss of control. The two words almost contradict each other. How do you be a proper lady while dancing? How do you dance while maintaining propriety? The answer is, you probably don't. Not really. Either you're dancing, really dancing, with your whole body and heart, or you're performing an acceptable imitation of dancing while staying carefully within bounds. And medieval Christmas gave people permission, for a brief time, to really dance, to let their bodies move, to be physical, be loud, be present in their skin in ways they couldn't be the rest of the year. But there's another layer here we need to talk about. The 9 ladies aren't just any women. They're ladies, meaning upper class, wealthy, privileged, and that matters. Because dance, like everything else in medieval society, was stratified by class. The dances that noble ladies performed were different from the dances that peasant women did. Noble ladies danced in great halls wearing expensive gowns with musicians playing. Peasant women danced in village greens, wearing their work clothes, with someone playing a pipe or just singing. The 9 ladies dancing in our song are probably imagining noble ladies, special, elevated, a gift worthy of mention. But the women who did most of the actual dancing at most Christmas celebrations, they were everyone. Noble ladies, yes, when they chose to participate, but also merchants' daughters, craftsmen's wives, servants, milkmaids, all the women we've been talking about, all dancing together, at least theoretically, during these festival times, and that mixing, that temporary dissolution of class boundaries through shared physical celebration, that was part of what made Christmas special. For a few days, you weren't just a milkmaid or a lady or a merchant's wife. You were someone dancing, someone singing, someone fully present in the moment. Do you dance? I'm curious. When was the last time you really danced? Not self-consciously, not for performance, but just because your body wanted to move. Does it feel different during celebrations than it does other times? Let me know in the comments. Because I think we've lost something of this embodied celebration. Modern Christmas for many people is so cerebral. It's about thoughts and feelings and spiritual reflections, which are all good. But medieval Christmas was also, maybe primarily, about bodies, about eating and drinking and dancing and singing, about being physical creatures who need physical joy. The ladies dancing remind us that we have bodies, and bodies are part of how we celebrate, how we worship, how we experience joy. You can't have incarnational theology, God becoming flesh, while being afraid of flesh, afraid of bodies, afraid of physical pleasure, and yet we are afraid, or at least conflicted. We've inherited centuries of that same tension the medieval church felt. We want joy but fear loss of control. We want celebration but worry about excess. We want to dance but wonder if we should stay still. The 9 ladies, dancing their way through the Christmas season, dancing through the 9 fruits of the Spirit, dancing while somehow maintaining their status as ladies, They're navigating that same tension, and maybe teaching us that it's okay to not resolve it perfectly, that maybe the tension is part of the dance. Because here's what I think. Self-control isn't the opposite of joy. It's not about suppressing yourself or staying still. Real self-control is knowing when to dance and when to be still, when to feast and when to fast, when to celebrate and when to mourn. It's having the freedom to do both, to move between them, to dance when dancing is called for without losing your center. That's harder than just staying controlled all the time. That's harder than just letting loose all the time. That's actual wisdom, knowing when each is appropriate and having the courage to fully commit to both. And that brings us to the next stage of our journey, where the celebration is going to collide head-on with the reality of power, politics, and the uncomfortable truth that Christmas has always been political. Because those 10 lords leaping, they're not just dancing for joy, they're jumping through a very specific set of social obligations, political calculations, and power dynamics. We're about to discover that Christmas gift-giving has always been about more than generosity, that the 12 days of Christmas were also 12 days of demonstrating loyalty, securing alliances, and reminding everyone of the social hierarchy. And we're going to have to confront the uncomfortable fact that the day when tenants owed rent to their landlords was Christmas Day itself. The lords are leaping, but not everyone is celebrating, and their story is going to complicate everything we've been building toward. You wake up on Christmas morning, it's December 25th. You can smell something cooking. Maybe your neighbours have managed to get meat for the feast. You can hear singing from the village green. The church bells are ringing. It should be a day of celebration, of rest, of joy. Except, today is also the day your rent is due, and if you don't have it, if you can't pay, you could lose your home. Your family could be turned out into the winter cold. On Christmas Day, welcome to the real economics of medieval Christmas. And those 10 lords leaping, they're not just celebrating, they're collecting, they're exercising power, they're reminding everyone exactly who owns what and who owns whom. This is where our journey gets uncomfortable, because we need to talk about what Christmas actually cost, who paid that cost, and how celebration and exploitation have always existed side by side. In this season we claim is about peace and goodwill. Let me explain what a quarter day was, because this is crucial to understanding medieval Christmas. The year was divided into 4 quarter days, 4 dates when financial obligations came due, when rent was paid, when debts were settled, when contracts were renewed or terminated, when servants' positions might be kept or lost. These were the pivot points of the economic year, and one of those 4 quarter days was December 25th, Christmas Day itself. Think about the timing. You're a tenant farmer. You've just harvested your crops in the fall. Your lord expects his share, his rent, paid in money or in kind. You have to calculate, how much can I give to the Lord and still have enough to feed my family through the winter? How much grain can I sell to get the cash for rent versus how much I need to keep for bread? And if the harvest was bad, if the weather was poor, if you got sick and couldn't work as much, too bad. Rent is still due on Christmas Day. The juxtaposition is stunning. In church, you're hearing about peace on earth, goodwill toward men. You're being told to love your neighbour, to be generous, to remember that Christ came for the poor and humble, and then you're going home to count out coins or measure out grain to hand over to your Lord, knowing that if it's not enough, he could evict you. Now, let's be clear. Not every lord was cruel. Some were genuinely generous, especially at Christmas. There are records of lords forgiving rents for tenants in difficult circumstances, hosting feasts where tenants were fed at the manor, giving gifts of food or clothing. The medieval ideal of lordship included responsibility for your people, genuine care for their welfare. But ideals and reality often diverge, and the structural setup, where the day of celebration is also the day of economic reckoning, that's not coincidence. That's power dynamics made visible. Because Christmas throughout history has always been political. Let's talk about what Christmas looked like at court, in the households of the truly wealthy and powerful, because this is where the politics becomes most visible. Gift-giving among the nobility wasn't a gesture of love or spontaneous generosity. It was calculated, strategic, political. You gave gifts to demonstrate loyalty, to secure favour, to maintain alliances. The value of the gift mattered. The timing mattered. Who gave to whom, and in what order. All of it was carefully choreographed political theatre. Royal account books from medieval and Tudor England are fascinating documents. They record in meticulous detail every gift given and received during the Christmas season, and the amounts spent was staggering. Henry VIII, for example, spent the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of modern dollars on Christmas celebrations and gifts. Not because he was feeling generous, but because his position required it. As king, he had to demonstrate his wealth, his power, his ability to be magnanimous. He gave gifts to foreign ambassadors to maintain diplomatic relations. He gave gifts to his nobles to secure their loyalty. He gave gifts to his servants to keep them happy and maintain his reputation. And everyone who received a gift from the king, they had to give gifts back, not of equal value. That would be presumptuous, but appropriate to their station, and if you gave too little, you risked insulting the king. If you gave too much, you risked looking like you were trying to compete with him. You had to calculate exactly the right level of gift to give. This is exhausting to even think about, isn't it? Christmas as a minefield of social obligation and political calculation. But that's what it was for the wealthy and powerful. And here's the thing. They had to participate in this system even if they didn't want to. Because opting out, refusing to play the game, that was political too. That sent a message. You couldn't just not give gifts to the king. You couldn't just skip the Christmas celebrations at court. Your presence, your participation, your gifts, all of it was a declaration of loyalty and position. Meanwhile, while the lords were leaping through these political hoops, giving carefully calibrated gifts to each other, their tenants were scraping together rent money and hoping there would be enough left over to buy something special for Christmas dinner. The symbolic interpretation of 10 lords a-leaping connects them to the 10 Commandments, those fundamental laws from Exodus. Don't murder, don't steal, don't covet, honor your parents, keep the Sabbath, worship only God. The irony is almost too perfect. The 10 Commandments include, you shall not covet your neighbor's possessions. Meanwhile, the entire gift-giving culture at court was based on coveting, on wanting what others had, on competitive displays of wealth. You shall not steal. Meanwhile, many people would argue that the rent system, where lords owned land their ancestors had seized by force generations ago and extracted wealth from people who actually worked that land, was itself a form of theft. Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. Meanwhile, Christmas Day was a work day for many people. Servants preparing feasts, stable hands caring for horses, cooks, cleaners, all the invisible labour that made the celebrations possible. The 10 Commandments were preached from the pulpit. They were taught to children. They were held up as the foundation of moral life. But the economic and social structures of Christmas? They routinely violated those very principles. Now, I'm not saying medieval people were hypocrites, or rather, they were, but we all are. We all have ideals that we fail to live up to. We all participate in systems that violate our values, That's the human condition. But it's worth acknowledging the gap. It's worth seeing that Christmas, even medieval Christmas, even supposedly more authentic or traditional Christmas, was already compromised by economics and power and politics. And when the Christmas season ended, when Epiphany passed and the 12 days were over, everyone went back to work. But the return wasn't subtle or gentle. It was marked by its own ritual, Plough Monday. Plough Monday was the first Monday after Epiphany, the day when agricultural work was supposed to resume, and in many parts of England it became a festival of sorts. Young men from the village would drag a plough through the streets, stopping at houses to perform little plays or songs and asking for money. If you gave generously, they'd bless your house. If you were stingy, they'd plough up your front yard. It was festive, sure, but it was also pointed. It was saying, the holiday is over, reality is back. We're returning to work that benefits you, landlord, you wealthy person. So how about some compensation? And there was another tradition, one that captured the gender dynamics beautifully. On St. Distaff's Day, January 7th, there was this playful war between men and women. Men would try to set women spinning flax on fire. Women would retaliate by dousing men with water. It was framed as fun, as pranks, as a way to ease back into work. But underneath the humour, there's tension, there's resistance, there's this sense of, do we really have to go back to normal? Can't we have just one more day of freedom? The Lords didn't have Plough Monday. They didn't drag ploughs through streets or make jokes about returning to work. They just returned back to managing their estates, collecting rents, maintaining their power. But for everyone else, the transition from celebration back to ordinary life was jarring. You'd spent 12 days pretending or experiencing a different kind of world, a world with more equality, more joy, more freedom, and now, back to hierarchy, back to obligation, back to knowing your place. Do you feel this after holidays? That sense of dread as vacation ends and you have to go back to work? That feeling of, can't we just extend this a little longer? I think that's universal. Medieval people felt it too. But here's what strikes me as I think about all of this. The fact that Christmas was political doesn't make it fake or meaningless. The fact that gift-giving was strategic doesn't mean there was no genuine affection. The fact that economic obligations continued during the feast doesn't mean people didn't experience real joy. Humans are complicated. We're capable of holding multiple things at once. You can genuinely celebrate Christmas while also collecting rent. You can genuinely feel goodwill while also calculating political advantage. You can genuinely believe in the 10 Commandments while also participating in economic systems that violate them. This doesn't make you evil. It makes you human. It makes you someone living in a complex world where purity is impossible and compromise is constant. And maybe, just maybe, understanding this complexity is important, because we do the same thing. We celebrate Christmas while participating in systems we know are exploitative. We preach peace while tolerating violence. We talk about generosity while hoarding resources. The 10 Lords leaping, representing the 10 Commandments while embodying everything those commandments critiqued. They're us. They're every generation. They're the permanent gap between what we claim to believe and how we actually live. What do you think? Is it possible to celebrate meaningfully while acknowledging this hypocrisy? Or does awareness of the contradictions ruin the celebration? I genuinely don't know the answer. What I do know is that understanding this political and economic reality makes the next part of our journey even more significant. Because if Christmas was structured around power and obligation and carefully managed social relations, then the feasting, the excessive, extravagant, over-the-top feasting takes on new meaning. When you're trapped in a system, when your obligations are endless, when even your celebrations are calculated and controlled, then excess becomes rebellion. Then eating until you can't move, drinking until you're dizzy, celebrating with an intensity that isn't reasonable or modest or controlled, that becomes an act of defiance. And that's what those 11 pipers piping are about to show us. We're entering the realm of medieval Christmas excess, of feasts that lasted hours, of Yule logs that burned for 12 days straight, of wassail and ale and meat and pudding and more meat and more ale until the whole thing becomes almost absurd. The pipers are piping, calling everyone to the feast, and what we're about to discover is that sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is embrace the material world so fully, so completely, that it becomes transcendent. Get ready. We're about to feast. The smell hits you first. Roasting meat, probably boar. Spices you've only smelled once or twice in your entire life. Cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, brought from impossibly distant lands. Baking bread. Wood smoke from the massive fire, and ale. So much ale. You step into the great hall on Christmas Day, and the feast table stretches impossibly long. There's a boar's head at the centre, an apple stuffed in its mouth decorated with holly. There's a swan roasted and then refeathered so it looks alive. There's a peacock, same treatment, its tail fanned out in full display. There are pies, so many pies. There are puddings. There are nuts and fruits preserved from summer. There are cheeses, breads, pastries shaped like stars and angels, and you're expected to eat it all. Not just eat it, feast on it. Gorge yourself. Eat until you can't move. Because for these 12 days, excess isn't a sin. It's the whole point. Welcome to the medieval Christmas feast, where gluttony becomes godliness, where drinking until you pass out is practically mandatory, where the church, which preached moderation all year long, suddenly says, go ahead, indulge. This is what we've been waiting for. And those 11 pipers piping, they're calling you to the table. They're soundtracking this glorious excess. They're reminding you that for 11 faithful apostles, all except the betrayer Judas, the feast is the point. The celebration is the worship. The body fed is the soul nourished. Let me take you into a medieval Christmas feast, because it's nothing like what we imagine. It's stranger, more intense, more excessive, and honestly, kind of disturbing if you think about it too hard. First, understand the context. For the 40 days before Christmas, the Advent season, people were supposed to fast. Not total fasting, but serious restriction. No meat, limited dairy, no rich foods. You were preparing for Christmas through deprivation, through discipline, through hunger. So by the time Christmas arrived, people were ready to eat. And I mean really eat. There are account books from medieval manor houses that record the food consumed during the Christmas season, and the quantities are insane. One record from a 14th century English manor shows that for a 12-day Christmas celebration, they consumed 24 oxen, 100 pigs, thousands of chickens and geese, hundreds of rabbits, countless fish, barrels and barrels of ale and wine, and enough bread to feed an army. That's for one household. Granted, a large household, a lord, his family, his servants, his tenants who were invited to feast on certain days. But still, the sheer volume of food is staggering. And it wasn't just about quantity. It was about spectacle, about showing off, about proving your wealth and status through the extravagance of your table. The boar's head was traditional, served with great ceremony, often carried in by servants singing a special song. The boar represented winter, wildness, the old year dying so the new could be born. Eating it was symbolic conquest, civilization triumphing over nature. Peacocks and swans weren't just food, they were statements. These birds were expensive, hard to prepare, and looked impressive. You'd roast them, carefully remove all the skin and feathers, then after cooking redress them so they looked alive. The peacock would have its full tail spread. The swan would have its wings arranged as if in flight. It was culinary taxidermy, basically, and everyone at the table would ooh and ah at the presentation before tearing into the meat. Then there were subtleties, elaborate sugar sculptures depicting scenes from the Nativity, or castles, or heraldic symbols. These weren't meant to be eaten, really. They were art. They were Instagram posts 500 years before Instagram. Look at what I can afford to create and then destroy. And pies. Medieval people loved pies, but not like our pies. These were massive constructions with thick crusts that weren't always meant to be eaten. They were more like edible serving dishes. Inside could be anything: meat, fish, eels, fruit, sometimes living birds that would fly out when you cut the pie open. Yes, seriously. 4 and 20 blackbirds baked in a pie wasn't a cute nursery rhyme. It was an actual party trick. The most famous Christmas pie was mince pie, which we still have today, but completely transformed. Medieval mince pies were rectangular, supposedly representing Jesus' crib, and they actually contained mincemeat, chopped mutton or beef mixed with suet, dried fruits, and spices. The spices represented the gifts of the Magi: cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves. So eating the pie was like participating in the nativity story. Over centuries, the meat gradually disappeared from the recipe, and by Victorian times, mince pie was just fruit and spices. But for medieval people, it was legitimately meat pie. Heavy, rich, probably delicious if you like that sort of thing. Now let's talk about what people drank, because this is where things get really interesting. Ale and beer were the standard drinks, safer than water, which could be contaminated. Medieval ale was thick, nutritious, lower in alcohol than modern beer. People drank it all day, every day, including children. It was liquid bread, essentially. But at Christmas, they drank wassail. We've mentioned wassail before in the context of singing to trees, but originally wassail was the drink itself, a hot spiced ale or cider, often with roasted apples floating in it, sweetened with honey or sugar if you could afford it. The word wassail comes from the Old English washail, be healthy, be whole. You'd make a huge bowl of wassail. We're talking a bowl big enough that you could almost bathe in it, and everyone would drink from it, passing it around, toasting each other's health. This was communal drinking, shared drinking, drinking that bound you together, and people got drunk. Seriously, fall down, can't walk straight, singing too loud, drunk. The church complained about it constantly. There are sermons from medieval priests railing against Christmas drunkenness, calling it shameful, sinful, a disgrace. But people kept doing it, because after 40 days of fasting, after a year of hard work, after everything we've been talking about, the hierarchy, the obligations, the grinding reality of medieval life, they wanted to forget. They wanted to escape. They wanted to feel good, even if it meant waking up with a pounding headache. And yes, they had hangover remedies. Medieval medical texts include recipes for morning after cures, raw eggs mixed with vinegar, willow bark tea, which actually works because willow bark contains the precursor to aspirin, hair of the dog, another drink to ease the pain of the previous drinks. Human nature doesn't change, does it? But here's what's fascinating. This excess, this feasting, this drinking and gorging, it wasn't seen as separate from religion. It was part of it. The Church taught that God created the material world and called it good, that the incarnation, God becoming flesh, sanctified physical existence, that Jesus' first miracle was turning water into wine at a party, that the central Christian ritual, the Eucharist, was a meal. So feasting, done in the right spirit at the right time, was worship. It was saying yes to creation, yes to the body, yes to pleasure as a gift from God. The Advent fast prepared you to truly appreciate the Christmas feast. You couldn't feast unless you'd fasted. You couldn't celebrate abundance unless you'd experienced scarcity. The rhythm was essential, and this rhythm was built into the agricultural calendar too. Midwinter was the perfect time for feasting because there was nothing else to do. The crops were harvested, the fields were sleeping, the animals were slaughtered before winter because feeding them through the cold months was expensive. So you had meat, lots of meat, and time, lots of time, and dark, cold days that needed some kind of light and warmth to get through. The Yule log was part of this. You'd select a massive log, the biggest piece of wood you could find, sometimes an entire tree trunk. You'd light it on Christmas Eve, and it was supposed to burn continuously for all 12 days of Christmas. You'd keep feeding it, keep it smouldering at least, as a symbol of the sun's return, the promise of spring, the light that conquers darkness. Keeping a fire burning for 12 days straight requires a lot of wood and a lot of attention, but it was worth it. The fire was the heart of the home. It was where you cooked, where you gathered, where you felt safe and warm. Letting it go out during Christmas would be like, I don't know, turning off all the lights during a birthday party. You just wouldn't. And gathered around that fire, eating and drinking for 12 days straight, people told stories, sang songs, played games. These weren't separate activities. Eating, drinking, talking, singing. They flowed together into one continuous celebration. There are medieval recipes that survive for some of these Christmas dishes, and they're wild. One recipe for boar's head involves boiling the head for hours, then glazing it with a mixture of egg yolks and saffron to make it golden, then decorating it with bay leaves and rosemary. The instructions say to present it with great noise of trumpets and carols. Great noise. That phrase keeps appearing in descriptions of medieval Christmas. Great noise, loud singing, loud talking, loud laughter. The opposite of the quiet, controlled, modest behaviour expected the rest of the year. For 12 days you were allowed, encouraged to be loud, to take up space, to be excessive, to be more than you normally were. In the symbolic interpretation, 11 pipers piping represent the 11 faithful apostles, the original 12 minus Judas, who betrayed Jesus. It's an interesting number to focus on. Not 12 complete, not 10 simplified, but 11, almost complete, but marked by absence and betrayal. And maybe that's appropriate for talking about excess and feast, because excess is always almost too much, almost sinful, almost wrong. It lives right on the edge of betraying the principles of moderation and self-control. But the 11 faithful apostles feasted with Jesus. They celebrated. They drank wine at the Last Supper, good wine, wine that Jesus himself provided miraculously at Cana. They weren't austere, removed, above physical pleasure. They were embodied humans who ate and drank and celebrated. It was Judas who left the feast to betray. The faithful stayed and ate. So maybe the message is, feast, stay at the table. Don't betray the celebration by leaving early, by holding back, by being too controlled. Trust that there's enough. Trust that excess in its proper time and place is holy. Of course, this is complicated by what we talked about in the last section. While lords were feasting on boar and peacock, Their tenants were eating simpler fare, maybe a chicken if they were lucky, or cheese and eggs, or boiled meat that was a rare treat. The excess wasn't equally distributed, but even the peasants ate better at Christmas than at any other time of year. Even they had ale and special foods. Even they participated in the feast on whatever scale they could manage. And that's something. That's acknowledgement that everyone, regardless of status, deserves celebration, deserves abundance, deserves joy. How do you feel about excess during holidays? Do you indulge or do you hold back? Do you feel guilty about eating too much, or do you embrace it as part of the celebration? I'm curious how we've internalized or rejected these medieval attitudes, because modern Christmas does have echoes of this. We still feast, though usually just on Christmas Day, not for 12 days. We still drink more than usual. We still make special foods we don't make the rest of the year. We still gather around tables and eat until we're uncomfortable. But we also feel guilty about it in ways medieval people didn't. We worry about calories, about health, about waste, about excess in a world where so many have so little. Our relationship with festive abundance is complicated. Maybe we need some of that medieval confidence, that sense that feasting at the right time is good and right and holy. That excess can be worship, that sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is say yes to a second helping. But we also need medieval wisdom about rhythm, about fasting before feasting, about knowing that excess is meaningful because it's temporary, because normal life will return, because the feast ends and work begins again. And that brings us to the final part of our journey. We've travelled through conspiracy theories, persecution, bans, chaos, symbolism, pagan roots, revelations, madness, inequality, politics, and excess. We've seen 12 days of celebration in all their complexity, contradiction, and beauty. Now we come to the end, to the 12 drummers drumming, to the moment when everything we've built comes crashing back to earth, to the superstitions about taking down decorations, to the return to ordinary life, to the question of what we do with all this history, all this meaning, all these layers of tradition. The drums are beating, marking time, reminding us that everything, even Christmas, eventually ends, and their story is going to challenge us to decide what we keep, what we release, and what we carry forward into the rest of the year. It's the evening of January 5th, 12th Night. You're standing in your home, looking at the decorations that have been up for 12 days, the holly, the ivy, the mistletoe, the greenery that brought life into your home during the darkest days of winter, and now you have to take them down, not tomorrow, not next week, tonight. Because there's a superstition, an old persistent superstition, that leaving your Christmas decorations up past 12th night will bring terrible luck, misfortune, maybe even death. It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Like the kind of thing only superstitious medieval peasants would believe. Except, do you know anyone who gets nervous if decorations stay up too long? Anyone who insists everything must come down by a certain date? Maybe you feel it yourself. That sense that something's not quite right if Christmas lingers too long. We're still following rules we don't understand from a tradition we've forgotten. And those 12 drummers drumming? They're beating out the rhythm of time passing, reminding us that everything, even the most beautiful celebration, must end. This is where our journey reaches its conclusion. But before we say goodbye to these 12 days of Christmas, we need to talk about endings, about what we've lost, what we've kept, and what it all means. Let me tell you about the superstition, because it's more interesting than you'd think. In medieval and early modern England, people believed that the greenery brought into the home for Christmas, the holly, ivy, mistletoe, and evergreen branches, contained spirits. Not evil spirits necessarily, but nature spirits, wild things that didn't belong in the domestic space permanently. You invited them in for the 12 days of celebration, but then you had to send them back out. If you kept them too long, the spirits would become malevolent. They'd curdle your milk, sour your beer, bring sickness to your household. Or, in some versions, the greenery itself would come alive and attack you. There are folk tales about holly berries turning into drops of blood, about ivy strangling people who left it up too long. These stories were ways of enforcing the ritual calendar. Christmas had to end. The celebration had to conclude. Normal life had to resume. And making it scary, making it dangerous to resist, ensured people complied. Although, interestingly, during the Elizabethan period, some people kept their greenery up until Candlemas, February 2nd, 40 days after Christmas. That was another significant date in the church calendar, the feast of the presentation of Jesus at the temple. So the rule wasn't universal. Like everything else we've explored, it varied by region, by period, by individual practice. But the core idea remained. There's a proper time for celebration and a proper time for its end, and you must honour both. Taking down the decorations on Twelfth Night became a ritual itself. Families would gather, remove the greenery, and in some traditions burn it in the fire. Not just throw it away, but ceremonially destroy it, returning it to ash, giving it back to the cycle of nature. The Yule log, which had been burning for 12 days, would be allowed to finally go out. Though you'd save a piece of it to light next year's log, maintaining continuity between seasons. And then, on January 6th, Epiphany, you'd wake up to a house stripped bare. The decorations gone, the festive season over, back to ordinary life. For modern people, this can feel almost brutal. We've just spent weeks, maybe months, building up to Christmas. We've decorated, prepared, shopped, planned, and then it's over. Done. One day, maybe two if you're lucky. Then back to work, back to routine, back to normal. We've lost the 12-day arc. We've compressed everything into such a short window that there's barely time to breathe, let alone celebrate. But medieval people, they had 12 days to build, to escalate, to reach peaks of celebration, and then to slowly, ceremonially, let it go. The rhythm was different, healthier maybe. In the symbolic interpretation, 12 drummers drumming represent the 12 points of the Apostles' Creed, that ancient summary of Christian belief that begins, I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. Now here's the thing about the Apostles' Creed. Depending on how you count the articles, you can get anywhere from 8 to 17 distinct statements of belief. There's no universally agreed upon way to break it into exactly 12 points. Which is kind of perfect, actually, because it reveals something we've been discovering throughout this entire journey. These symbolic interpretations are imposed after the fact. They're not original to the song. They're attempts to find meaning, to create connections, to make something secular into something sacred. And you know what? That's okay. That's human. We're meaning-making creatures. We see patterns, create stories, build connections. The fact that the 12 drummers might not have originally represented the Apostles' Creed doesn't mean that connection is worthless. It means we're participating in the same process that's been happening for centuries, taking something simple and layering meaning onto it. But it does mean we need to hold our interpretations lightly, to recognize that meaning is something we create together over time through shared belief and practice, not something fixed and eternal and unchangeable. And that brings me to the real question at the heart of this entire exploration. What is the hidden meaning of the 12 days of Christmas? Not the secret Catholic code. We've established that's almost certainly not historical. Not the symbolic interpretations connecting each gift to Christian theology. Those are beautiful, but probably not original. So what is the actual meaning hiding in this song? Here's what I think, after travelling through all 12 parts of this journey with you. The hidden meaning of the 12 days of Christmas is that there is no single meaning. The song is a palimpsest, a manuscript that's been written on, erased, and written on again, over and over, until you can see traces of every layer if you look closely enough. It's a party game from the 1700s. It's a memory test. It's a courting song. It's a gift-giving fantasy. It's a window into medieval celebrations we've lost. It's a container for symbolism people have poured into it. It's a tradition that's evolved with every generation that's sung it. It's all of these things at once. The real hidden meaning is history itself, layered, complex, contradictory, messy, human. We've seen how Christmas was banned and survived, how it absorbed pagan traditions and transformed them, how it created spaces for chaos and misrule, how it evolved through linguistic drift and mishearing, how it was built on Roman festivals and Norse celebrations, how it celebrated revelation and mystery, how it mixed sacred and profane without apology, how it acknowledged inequality while doing little to change it, how it used dance and body and excess as forms of worship, how it served political purposes while claiming to transcend politics, how it created rhythms of feasting and fasting that modern life has lost. And through all of that, through all the changes and adaptations and contradictions the song survived, the tradition persisted, not because it stayed pure or unchanged, but because it kept adapting, because every generation found something in it worth keeping, even as they modified it for their own time and needs. That's the hidden meaning. That's the secret. Traditions survive by changing. Meaning survives by being remade. The past reaches us not as a pure transmission, but as a living thing that's been shaped by every hand that's touched it. So what do we do with this knowledge? What do we do with everything we've learned? I think we have a choice. We can feel disillusioned. Oh, none of this is what I thought it was. It's all just made up. It doesn't mean anything. Or we can feel empowered. Oh, this has always been made up, has always been evolving, which means I can participate in making meaning too. I prefer the second option, because recognizing that Christmas traditions are human creations doesn't make them less meaningful. It makes them more meaningful. It means we're connected to every person who's ever sung this song, who's ever celebrated Christmas, who's ever tried to create joy and meaning in the darkness of winter. You're not just following ancient traditions, you're continuing them, adding your layer to the palimpsest, making meaning for your time, your place, your people. And that brings us full circle to where we started, with the question of whether the 12 days of Christmas contains a hidden code. It doesn't. But it contains something better. It contains us. All of us. Everyone who's ever sung it. Everyone who's ever celebrated during these 12 days. Everyone who's ever tried to make winter bearable through community and feast and song. There's a modern tradition that captures this beautifully. Since 1984, PNC Bank has calculated the Christmas Price Index, the cost of buying all the gifts mentioned in the song. 1 partridge in a pear tree, 2 turtle doves, 3 French hens, all the way up to 12 drummers drumming. If you add up all the repetitions, because by the end of the song you've received the partridge 12 times, the turtle doves 11 times, etc., you get 364 gifts total. In 2024, the total cost was calculated at over $49,000, just for the basic gifts. The luxury version, with upgrades, was over $200,000. It's silly, it's absurd, it completely misses the point of the song, which was never about actual gift-giving at that scale. But it's also kind of perfect, because it shows how we keep finding new ways to engage with this old tradition, how we keep making it relevant, keep playing with it, keep making it ours. The song endures not because it has one true meaning we must preserve, but because it's flexible enough to hold many meanings. It can be a party game, a religious meditation, an economic calculation, a historical artifact, a children's song, a cultural touchstone. It can be all of these things because we make it all of these things. So here's my challenge to you as we reach the end of this journey. What will you make of Christmas? What layer will you add to the tradition? Will you try celebrating for 12 days instead of just one? Will you research your own family traditions and discover their hidden histories? Will you create new rituals that honor the old while adapting to the new? Will you hold the tension between celebration and justice, between excess and moderation, between reverence and chaos? Will you dance when dancing is called for? Will you feast when feasting is right? Will you make room for both the sacred and the silly? Because that's what the 12 days of Christmas have always been about. Not following rules perfectly, but living fully. Not maintaining purity, but embracing complexity. Not staying the same, but evolving while staying connected to what came before. The 12 drummers are drumming. Time is passing. The season is ending. But the story continues. The tradition continues. We continue. And maybe that's the most profound hidden meaning of all. That we're part of something bigger than ourselves, something that stretches back centuries and will continue long after we're gone. That our celebrations matter not because they're perfect or pure, but because they connect us to each other, to the past, to the rhythms of nature and time and human community. So thank you for taking this journey with me. Thank you for staying through all 12 parts, through all the history and complexity and contradiction. Thank you for being willing to see Christmas not as a simple, sentimental holiday, but as the rich, layered, deeply human tradition it actually is. If this journey has meant something to you, if you've learned something or seen Christmas differently or felt connected to the long arc of human celebration, I'd love to hear about it. Leave a comment. Tell me what surprised you most. Tell me what you're going to carry forward into your own Christmas celebrations. Tell me if you're going to try keeping the decorations up through Epiphany, or wassailing your apple trees, or baking a 12th night cake with a bean in it. And if you want to explore more stories like this, more deep dives into traditions we think we know but actually don't, hit that subscribe button. Because history is full of hidden layers, and I'm just getting started uncovering them. The 12 days are ending. But the story, your story, our story, the human story of making meaning in the darkness, that story never ends. It just keeps evolving. Keep singing, keep celebrating, keep adding your verse to the song. Until next time. Good night.